call the meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business, item 1.03, approval or revision of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Kelly. Second from Sarah. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. No one's opposed or abstaining. Next item on the agenda, item 2.01, presentation regarding property tax exemptions. Is council here yet?
Council is not here yet.
Okay. So perhaps we should go to number 2.02 then, the electric bus transition. Not to, sorry about that, Brad.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. Tonight we'll talk about the electric bus initiative, and basically it's kind of broken into 4 parts where we'll talk a little bit about each thing, but the main points are really driven by what do we know and what we don't know, and you'll see as we go through, and then you'll have questions, I'm sure, and we'll go through. So as I just talked about, here's kind of how I'm going to break it down, what we know, what we don't know, next steps, and then we'll go through questions. So to start, New York State law requires that school districts purchase at least 1 electric bus by 2027, and the entire fleet be electric or zero emission by year 2035. So that's the main standard. So currently for FM purposes, we have 65 diesel buses, and they are stored outside, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means as we keep going. Price quotes for electric and diesel buses. Electric bus quote, we actually did have a group up here. We did a little mock where they showed us the actual bus, and we actually received a 1-for-1 quote based on a large size bus. I think it was like 65 or 66 passenger, and the actual quote I think was somewhere around $475,000. Current diesel bus quotes, if I've got my numbers fairly close, I think they're somewhere around $194,000. It's been up substantially from past years where they were probably more in the 140s to 150s. So just basic math, estimated 65 bus replacement cost, just to kind of put things in perspective, and even though there'll be some estimations here, it's somewhere around the $31 million mark. And the last point, the existing bus garage parking lot, there is no additional capacity. So again, we'll talk a little bit about what that means as we keep going through. So what we don't know, electric grid capacity, is the existing grid capable to provide the needed electricity on demand? And that's, I'm sure, the kind of first and foremost question that folks will be hearing about. Next point, we will need to develop a bus replacement plan. We don't want to replace the entire fleet in 1 year, so basically if you think about what we do, it's somewhere in that 5 to 6 buses annually, and basically it's almost like the fact of when you're doing a capital project, you kind of don't want to have the debt roll on all at once, and then you kind of get a roller coaster, from a budgetary perspective, so it'd be something you'd probably be spreading across. Will we need a larger bus fleet in the near future? So a couple things going on. One of them we're well aware of, it's already started, the pre-K, and then we'll kind of see how that works out from a transportation perspective. And then the kind of wild card being the Micron impact and what that's going to impact. Next things, what size charging station do we need? So sizes can range anywhere from like a light duty to a medium heavy duty. The heavy duty, from the way I understand it, is similar to the size maybe of a refrigerator, if you think about that from a comparison perspective. And as you see below it, light versus heavy duty charging stations. Light duties are actually cheaper, but they may not charge quick enough for school demand, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through as well. Cost of medium heavy-duty charging stations, just to put more of a price tag on it from the larger one, because it'd be more impact, so we could put through a conservative approach, and that'd be somewhere around the $80,000 from what I've seen at this point. But some of the numbers are they're estimated, given they're not defined each time. So a total estimated cost, heavy-duty charging stations for a current fleet of 65 buses, again, estimated by doing basic math, somewhere in that $5 million range, $5.2 million. A medium heavy-duty charging station provides the fastest charge, but significantly reduces the life of the battery. So it's kind of like your phone, how fast do you want it? Of course, everybody wants everything fairly quick, and then I think you have a difference probably between residential and as well as what we do here, being a school district. So estimates say that a new battery can last up to 6 years, but with consistent use it will reduce the life of the battery expectancy significantly. Some of the presentations I've seen said it could be as much as, it could be as few, I should say, as 4 years as far as the actual life itself based on the usage. And again, the faster the charger, the more reduction in the use. Battery replacement cost estimates have been anywhere from 30 to 50% of bus cost. This again is an estimate, somewhere in the 100 to 200,000 per battery. I've seen some a little bit lower. I'm not really sure what the number is. There's been a couple of different presentations I've seen, and that was one that they really weren't too sure as far as where that would actually be, but this was one of the ones I saw earlier on, so I put that information in. So now impact, salt and corrosion impact on electric buses. So one of the items, cost to replace an electric bus motor, so located underneath, I think it's in the back of the bus, somewhere in that $50,000 range from what we received an estimate on. That's another piece of material that would be impacted. Bus performance, location variables such as cold weather, the northern climate that we reside in, and the hilly terrain can cause a reduction in the range distance electric buses can travel. So for FM purposes, we have approximately 42 square miles within the district. We'll talk a little bit about that. So electric bus distance estimates with a full charge. So the last time presentation I saw, on the high end, we were hearing somewhere around the 120 miles in optimal conditions. On the low end, it was somewhere around 80 miles, with, again, with the weather, the terrain, things that cause drag, things of that nature. In our case, FM buses, current estimated travel, so John's here with me, and some of the information we received. So if you think about FM, you could have up to 6 different runs during a day. So morning a district run, somewhere 35 to 40 miles. Out of district run could be anywhere from 70 to 100, depending on what we're going, or where we're going, I should say. A midday run, 20 to 40 miles. Afternoon in district run, 35 to 40. Late run, 20 to 40, and a sports trip, 10 to 40. So it's probably not as common to have one bus do all of them, but in some cases, John said, we have had, you know, certain drivers that I know in my past district, you take your own bus and they would run that entire trip with that one bus. So we'd have to figure that out. Will the significant increase in electricity costs be offset by a corresponding reduction in diesel bus related costs? So that'll be one of the questions of what we're going to see with the impact from the electric charge, things of that nature, to offset what we're going to be spending in diesel. So that'd be a question that we'll need to find out. Capital improvement questions, the electric panel and substation needs. That'd be something we'll need to determine. Existing parking lot size limitations, where do we expand to fit the bus fleet and the required charging stations? Again, the bus parking lot down there, where you really have almost space enough to fit basically a person in between each bus. So if you really are going to use a large charging station and they are the size of a refrigerator, I'm not sure the width is really going to, be in a situation where we can use that existing footprint. To go backwards, or back behind it, I should say, you're going to end up, really in the Wellwood backyard of that. I'm not really sure that would fit as well, so that would have to be something we'd have to talk about, but we've got some opportunities for, some discussion with that in a minute. So next thing, do we need an indoor transportation facility? The buses are limited by the cold. So I believe 32 degrees was the temperature mark, where anything below 32, the battery wouldn't work effectively, so it needs to be charged, and actually, I believe heated, if that's correct, to actually have the bus run. So that would be a question. Are there any additional safety considerations needed for electric buses? So storage, fire safety when working on them, things of that nature, because you're basically going from working on something that's a diesel motor to something where it's electric-based environment. Training needs of drivers and mechanics, requirements for driving and maintaining electrical buses, any additional staff requirement needs, so will we need to track and monitor daily bus charge status for route needs with additional daily runs, sports and field trips. I think there is actually a service when we saw our last presentation where they actually recommend having a service where they monitor certain buses of what you've got with current charges for whatever you're going to be doing during the day for the needs you'll have. Will we see significant technology improvements to provide lower prices or better product, i.e. with a lower battery costs and a longer life? So as technology evolves, ideally you'd see a longer life and lower costs. Will bus manufacturers be able to meet the large electric bus demand? So there's approximately 700 public school districts in New York State, and there's approximately 50,000 buses needed. At this point, it would be a point of concern, so that's something, again, probably is up above. Would these technology improvements enhance the manufacturing capability and capacity as well? Again, so what funding opportunities are available? So, i.e. in this case, National Grid, we did have an opportunity to speak to them. FM has asked National Grid to perform a feasibility analysis. They're more than willing to do it at no cost, and it will take, they said, roughly a month to complete. I'm not sure if you get another districts in the queue if that would change the time frame, but again, no cost, and they said basically a 30-day analysis. Funding limitations. So currently FM doesn't qualify for most need-based funding. Some of the funding currently exists based on impact within disadvantaged communities. So the way I understand it, bus routes would need to enter these communities to allow for the funding. So I think it was when we talked to the folks, I think it was last week, they had mentioned there was a Volkswagen legal suit that got settled, and as part of some of that, they're actually, if you were going to take advantage of the program, then it needed to go through certain disadvantaged communities. I'm not really sure if it's where the routes have to pass through the community or the end route has to be within the actual disadvantaged community. So that was one specific one. Will the funding be accessible to FM and continue in subsequent years to minimize future budget impact of subsequent costs? So again, as the funding goes, and I'm sure we'll hear more beyond what we've spoken to with just National Grid about funding opportunities. They'd indicated there will be more opportunity, and we'll hear about that. So how do we come up with the needed funds? So approximately over $30 million just in buses if there isn't substantial state federal funding. So for our purposes, 1% of the tax levy growth on the budget is approximately about $700,000. So if you think again, $30 million in relation to the taxes being about $700,000, you can kind of come up with the dollars from that aspect. How much would the additional cost be if we need to make facility changes? So purchase a new location or somehow expand our existing transportation facility. And then on top of that, how long would it take to get it ready? Because we'd have to get involved, basically just if you think about the capital project process we're going through now with hiring an architect, construction management, defining the area, and then what it would take to get it to where we need it to be. Are there any more viable options, i.e. Hybrid electric version or consideration of a hydrogen fuel cell bus? From the way I understand it, I think there are larger transportation vehicles, trucks, that are using a hydrogen fuel cell. I know it's basically, in this case we're limited to electric, but if it's going to be a situation where it's a non-diesel, is that an opportunity? And that'll be something maybe that we'll look at as well. A lack of comparative or quantitative data. So at this point, I believe there's 3 districts in somewhat of the area, I'll call it quote unquote, Gates, Chili, Lakeshore, and Bethlehem schools, and they're using an electric bus. I know we've had a couple, or at least one of our head mechanics has reached out and spoke to either one of their transportation directors and mechanics, and basically everything's evolving at this point for them because it's pretty new. So, but they've given us a little bit of feedback. And is there consideration to push out the current timeline of 2027 and 2035 until there's more useful information available? That would be the big thing I would hope for, given a lot of these questions. Is that timeline a solid timeline, or is that something that the governor or the state would consider pushing that out? So next steps, so continue to gather information and funding options from state and federal funding to minimize the purchase costs. We'd like to have a feasibility analysis study performed by National Grid to help determine bus needs and facility upgrade options and cost estimates. We'd like to request community involvement to determine how to best proceed, because it'll be a very big decision. And we'd also have to develop a bus purchase plan and incorporate that into the school budget and how we do from the funding aspect. So again, current requirements state we need to purchase at least 1 bus by 2027, and again, the entire fleet be electric or zero emission by year 2035. So I know that was a lot. There's a lot of questions there. Again, it was a situation where there was a few knowns and for the most part a lot of unknowns. Is there questions, or I'm sure there is, probably, that I can do my best with John here and help answer some of that.
So when is National Grid scheduled to start their study?
There's an application process, I understand. We're going to receive that shortly and complete it, and I think it should be like within a day's turnaround. So I'd like to have it done sooner than later, Marissa, ASAP to be kind of specific.
And so you said you're going to request community involvement to determine how best to proceed. What does that look like, or what are you thinking about?
Well, in my past history, as far as the district I was at before, we ran into situations where things were a little bit bigger sometimes than just having, lots of unknowns. We sometimes would create committees and things of that nature, have discussions from that level. If the board was open to that, that might be something where, whether it's incorporated through like a facilities committee, we're going to talk about everything from, how we're going to go through and purchase something from the actual, or build, and get it involved there. But I would probably suggest maybe having some discussions at that level, because I'm guessing there'll be a lot of unknowns as well as, and then determinations that could then feed up from the committee and get provided to the board.
And then my last thing would just be if we could make sure, or to post this presentation somewhere, so, or in some format, so that people could see all this information, those who wouldn't normally go to like the minutes or whatever. I think it would be great for the community to be able to see where we are, what we need to do, and et cetera. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. A lot of it, it's going to be fluid. You know, I'd love to have a little more definitive as far as the numbers go, but as time goes, we'll get those, but certainly no problem with having that available. Yep. Are there other questions?
Brad, did they give you a quote as to how long the lead time is to get one of these buses? I think the backlog's pretty significant, right, with everybody in the state trying to get one?
What have you heard, John?
Yeah, I know that it's at least 2 years. I mean, we've been, for our diesel buses, we're a year and a half for our buses that we ordered a year and a half ago. We still haven't received them yet. And the thing is with the electric buses is they're so new, everything is so new that they're like learning as they're building them. And like the first ones I know that they've had out, like the Bethlehem had, they've already changed the design because it didn't work quite the way it should work. So it's one of those things that you almost got to wait a little bit to, you know, till they get it ironed out a little bit, you know. Yep.
So just to expand on that, Jason, one of the topics I think John and I were talking about, it's kind of like maybe cell phones for back in the day for everyone. You have your first editions, and what does that look like? And as you roll it out and technology evolves, ideally it gets better with time. It's just a matter of what do those first runs look like for maybe some of the districts that are going to be able to help us with Bethlehem and Gage Chili, and talk to them about what are those buses, what are the issues they're seeing, and then maybe potentially, ideally before we purchase, you know, is there anything beyond that that we could learn from, you know, what they're experiencing in that first round?
Yeah, I guess, Brad, where I was going with it is that if we've got to purchase the first bus in 2027, I know we're only in 2023, but if we've got a 2-year lead time, right, we've only got about a year and a half to at least start to formulate the plan, right?
Correct.
And again, not that we have to buy them all in 2027, but just to have the first one and at least start to be prepared for it, that's all.
Yeah, I think the hope for us is going to be really that National Grid piece where they do the feasibility analysis and kind of look at, because, you know, where are we going to put these things is going to be the first step, you know, literally from the charging and things of that nature. Because if the existing, you know, facility where we've got it isn't going to work, we need to figure out where's home base and then kind of go from there. But you're right, you know, the purchase plan has to start moving forward too.
Because all the seminars that I've gone to, the first thing they expect you to do, but a lot of places don't do, is to, like Brad's saying, you have to plan your facility to be able, because a lot of places will order the electric buses and it's like, okay, how am I going to charge it? You know, and then their facility doesn't have the power to charge and they don't have the room for the chargers and everything else. So you got to do it step by step. So.
Brad, are we, like some of the local districts that are in similar, obviously everybody's in the same situation as us, is there a committee or somebody talking about who's going to be the pilot group, you know, to kind of work out some of the answers to some of these questions? Or
Up until probably last week's year, I didn't realize Bethlehem was the only district I'd heard of, you know, kind of quote unquote locally, that he had it. And then I found out, you know, that Gage Chili had it and a couple others have had it. As far as our local OCM BOCEs, we met last week and it was one of the topics that was discussed with superintendents as well as my group. And I'm not aware of anybody else that's going to have them, you know, in the real imminent future. I know like Fabius and some other ones have put in for grant money, but I'm not aware of any orders going in or when they would have them. So my eyes are really going to be probably on the Gage Chili and Bethlehem's and, you know, reaching out to those folks.
Part of the OCM BOCES group is taking a look at a shared BOCES facility. I think I shared with Facilities Committee what other local BOCES have done, so that's part of the conversation with them, although for a BOCES the size of OCM, that would be pretty significant. As Brad mentioned, we just met last week. It was great to have folks there from NYSERDA as well as facilities planning, and one of the superintendents asked a great question Just look at what we went through recently for our own capital project to get approved. If you have 700 districts all trying to meet a 2035 deadline, and state ed doesn't ramp up the approval system, one of the superintendents said, you know, if the approval takes so long as it just did with our high school project, we won't be able to transport. If we're supposed to have an electric fleet, you know, those districts that are somehow at the end of the line will not be able to transport, you know, will be on remote instruction because unless the rules get changed. And I think that was kind of a sobering thought. I don't know if Brad wants to add anything. John was there as well. It's great to be able to work together, but the point was well taken. With 700 districts trying to comply, state ed is going to have to ramp up their approach to this as well.
I was, sorry, Daryl, you go first.
Well, I don't want to take us down the wrong path, but I'm just curious. Do either of you know anything about the hydrogen fuel? Our Assemblyman Sturpey mentioned at the legislative forum that that was what he would prefer, and I just wonder if, you know, where we are in the state of the art.
Yeah, I've researched the hydrogen fuel thing quite a bit, and the thing with a hydrogen fuel vehicle, like you could take one of our school buses that we currently own, and everything is the same except that you just change the fuel supply to the engine. The engine is still a combustible engine, it's still basically a diesel engine, but they change the fuel supply. So it is in the works. It's just this came out first, so this is what's being pushed. I mean, I know that there is a company, it's not one of the big bus companies right now, but I Googled it the other day, and they are coming out with a hydrogen bus this coming year sometime. So the thing is with doing the electric bus thing, it has made everybody work harder to get going on, you know, the hydrogen and all that stuff. It's just, everything's going to take a little bit of time to get together. So that's why I would just take my time to see what happens. And I've heard through vendors and stuff that those dates will change because they can't supply that. They can't supply the buses. They just can't. So those dates will change, but they haven't yet. But that's why you just have to proceed slowly just to make sure you make the right decision.
John, would it be possible then to convert our diesel buses? I mean,
Well,
for less money?
I wouldn't say you would probably convert them because it would have a fuel cell. There would be like I have a race car and it has a fuel cell, so if you ever crashed, the fuel can't come out. It's like and that's what they will have on a bus. It's called a fuel cell. It's basically like rubber or plastic, so it can't be punctured or nothing. So it would be too hard to retrofit them, but I'm sure the cost will be less than the electric bus. And it would fit into our footprint that we already have.
I think that's the big thing is going to be that footprint piece. You know, that thing is obviously not that old, and from that aspect of it, so that would be one of the advantages there. So I am curious if it's something from a zero emission impact, you know, why then could we not consider a hydrogen fuel cell, especially if some of these larger vehicles already have them? You know, does it really have to be electric versus, you know, a hydrogen fuel cell? So that would be one of the questions I would have.
So I'm curious if there's anything we need in our budget for 2023, 2024 to support all of your work to do this due diligence and start thinking about facilities planning.
Great question. The first thing was basically what was the feasibility study going to be, and at this point being free. Yep. And so after that, there isn't really anything I've put in for 23, 24 at this point to do. What we will have is, and you'll see that as I'm going to do that shortly after, will be when we discuss the capital portion of the budget, you will have a cap transfer area, and that's kind of where we maybe potentially be using funds later down the road, where we talk about if we're going to do some kind of enhancements. Transportation itself, I'll be talking about within the program portion of the budget in March, and at that point, if we find out there's new information with purchasing we need to get ahead of, yeah, you can bet I'm gonna, we'll be putting that through.
I was just curious, how many companies are manufacturing electric buses? Is it a similar market right now to what, when we go out to market for new diesel buses?
Four, right.
Okay.
There's Bluebird, Thomas, International, and Lion. It's a smaller company, but,
And we have had the one, like we said back, I think it was November-ish or whatever,
yeah.
that they came out and actually brought, the vehicle out and got to show us and everything. So we have seen it, and some folks have rode on it and everything.
Do you have any sense at this point in starting to talk to those 3 districts that you mentioned that have at least one electric bus? Like, what kind of issues are they having? I know it's pretty new, so.
Selfishly, I'm looking at a couple of different things, and it's really the extended cost piece. So the 475 is sticker shock for probably any of us, but it's really how long is that battery going to last? And if we think of a life cycle of our current bus, we're probably running somewhere in the 10 to 12 year range.
Yeah.
So if those batteries are going to be, let's say 6 is the max, so that's probably we're going to add then at least one at year 6, and then ideally it doesn't die until we get rid of the bus in year 12. If we need the large charger, heavy charger on it, that means then in 6 years is probably too much, and it won't last that long. So now we're talking 2, and if those are 200,000 a piece, I don't know pick a number, 100,000, whatever the number is. So instead of 475, start adding whatever 100,000 or 150,000 per. Now we're talking somewhere in the 600,000 to 700,000. So I don't know with that piece, but what I'm hearing on distance-wise, they did say at 150 or whatever, they were down to somewhere around 100 or 120 was the max distance. And showing you those 6, what we're doing for our current fleet for going. We're going to have some kind of manager go through with this thing. At some point, it's just we're a school district, we're a large school district. Somebody's going to say somebody's got to go somewhere, whatever it's an educational field trip, sports trip, and we're going to have to figure out what bus can do it. Because at some point, it's kind of like you can go check a fuel gauge very quickly, but now to program that in your head and figure out what kind of conditions is that bus going to make that trip, make it back, etc. I mean, our worst case is if we're stuck somewhere, with a busload of kids, that's not how we want to do it.
So we'd be talking about adding maybe some capacity and logistics in the transportation department to make sure that we can manage that.
I think they actually have a management type software that actually goes with it. I haven't explored that yet. I learned that one last week. So, but it made sense to me knowing what we do, that, you out of 65 buses, somebody to go stick their head in each one and figure out, who's got what, you know what I mean? Just literally to figure it out.
That's the biggest drawback with them. I mean, I drove it and everything, it went great and everything. Doesn't have the distance, because they put summer tires on them because there's no drag. Because whenever you get drag, it uses more electricity. So then, it's winter time, you put, we have fairly aggressive winter tires on the back of them. That causes a lot of drag, so that brings the mileage down. Then you use our chains or something, that brings the mileage down. So everything that you turn on the heat brings the mileage down, all that stuff. So that's their biggest problem that they have right now, and that's why nobody's buying them really right now, is because they don't have the range to go anyplace.
And my understanding too is it's not just field trips or sport trips. I mean, it's our regular triple tripping, or if we decide double tripping, it's getting that bus back to the barn and being able to charge it before the afternoon runs, correct?
Yep. Oh, definitely.
So those are like some of the wild cards. I mean, now you add pre-K to it, and what's the future of that? Where is it going to be? That kind of thing. And then if Micron comes through, what are we going to need for that? So I don't know the fleet size, but I can't imagine the current fleet size is going to be the same. If anything, I think we're going to be expanding. I think as well, I think when the battery gets low enough was one of the things I didn't talk about, you're limited or handicapped of what you can actually have for heat and things of that nature, right?
Yep, yes, yep.
So the answer basically to some of my concerns, or, what I'm looking for, it's really those districts. I want to hear how far you're really going. I think their terrain's probably not too far different from ours. I think they're more of a Rochester, Buffalo area, so it's probably similar from what they're seeing, at least weather and snow and things of that nature. What's real life? Tell me what you're going through.
So you're gonna need to build a bus garage somewhere pretty close, you're gonna need a pretty large space to do that. And I'm just thinking about the limitations that we have in the community to put a huge bus garage like that someplace. So that's something that's gotta be looked at pretty soon as well, especially if, Micron comes in and needs some housing or whatever, but, so I just think that's something we have to look at pretty quickly, because I don't really see a lot of opportunities for us to build that size of a bus garage within our district.
No, I think, 10 years ago, or 11 years, whatever it was, I was here, as a treasurer at the time, we were talking about where we're gonna put the current garage, and I think Broadfield got mentioned to wherever else. So, yeah. So I'd heard all that, and kind of we explored that, and I was here, I think, at the point where we'd moved over to, whatever that facility was that was over by Friendly's and, O'Brien and Gear. So I'm not sure what it's gonna look like. I don't think we have it currently on our campus, and it's probably gonna have to be some kind of a purchase, is my guess, or we're gonna start taking out, behind Wellwood. There's just I don't know how to do it any other way, and I don't think we're gonna do that. So that's where we're gonna tie this into probably some kind of, I think whoever asked the question about, how would this go, where we'd involve folks with some kind of a facilities group or whatever, it's gonna be a lot bigger than just simply buses. If we go to that point, from charging, we're gonna need a footprint that, ideally you can put them inside, would be the ideal, thing that we'd end up doing. And then at that point, what's big enough and as well as logistically makes sense to be able to do this. And if Micron comes or whatever, then we're gonna have to just add or have space for that aspect as well. So those are kind of the wild cards.
Just a couple quick things. So, John, do you just remember offhand, what are we spending per bus on diesel in an average year right now?
Average year, we go through, we get a load every 2 weeks, 7,500 gallons, and right now I think it's $30,000 a load, right around there.
Do you know what it's working out to per bus per year?
I don't. I should have bought that, but I didn't, honestly.
Okay.
The buses get around 10 miles a gallon, right around there, for a full-size bus. And I would say the average bus is probably going, probably 30,000 miles a year, 20 to 30,000 miles a year, right in that area.
Okay. And then, Brad, on the batteries replacement, which obviously, as you know, as you said, we're going to have to replace, we're getting about 75% state aid on current buses. But is that just on purchases, or is that on parts and replacement parts also?
So there's percentages there for different things. So one of the questions that came up last week at our meeting was going to be everything from how we're going to do things in the future, whether there'll be aid as far as on the actual facility itself, to the chargers, to, in this case, the buses and whatever that's going to require. Then you've got the aspects of labor and things of that nature. Certain things, that you're right, it'd be whatever that transportation aid ratio is, and I can't remember off the top of my head what ours is, but I think it tells you 75 or whatever.
Yeah, so I guess my point is on the what do we not know list, there's actually an additional bullet, which is what do we not know is the things we don't even know to ask or
Correct.
do yet, and there's a lot more there. I mean, replacing a battery at, call it $100,000, right? If that's not aidable, or aidable close to a percentage of a new bus piece,
That's a good point.
That's a massive additional per bus expenditure. And I think one of the things that our community needs to remain very mindful of, as many say, let's just start buying buses and do what we need to do to get buses, is busing isn't our only facilities need in this district. And we have already identified great areas of academic need in the academic buildings.
Sure.
All of which has tax impact. And there's not an endless barrel to go into. So when we talk about the busing and the chargers and likely a new bus garage at some new location, maybe or maybe not aidable, having a significant tax impact, we still have a lot of work to do in our school buildings where we actually teach our students. And so that has to be weighed extremely carefully, where there's this great urge to just jump and start in.
Sure.
But that's massive expenditures, and so just, I think community-wise, we need to keep being very clear that we're not done with needs in our buildings, and we never will be done with needs in our buildings.
No, you're right, Dan. It's one of those where, being on the facilities committee, you've seen it where, we've got a current $52 million project that just got approved. We're gonna have the building condition survey, here in the next 6 months or, whatever it is, 9 months. And that's gonna identify what remaining needs are, and at some point, we got the next project coming right after that. So I'll be talking about a lot of that, but, so add that to it. It's separate and distinct from it at this point, but it's
And,
certainly.
and my point on that is, and I appreciate that, is even if we were to do, for example, a dedicated committee to further study electric busing, which I think there's a lot of merit to do, that has to be evaluated in context of, look at it and say, okay, we could do all this and it's a 2% tax implication, we should do it. Well, that's meaningless unless you're looking at it in the context of what else do we need to spend? What else are we obligated to spend? What is this building condition survey going to tell us about what we need to spend in this district in the next 5 to 7 years? And those dollar numbers are not insignificant. They're very significant in the remaining buildings to be done.
They are material.
And so I think evaluating anything in isolation, limited to just busing, is one issue. And the other is just to stick a pin in it, as we look at bus garage options, where and how. It's not just looking at electric grade capacity, but we gotta look at water capacity. And that's where the fire department, of wherever that's gonna be staged, is gonna have to be involved, because the amount of water that is required in the event of anything adverse with these batteries is massive, and beyond the capacity that we have in most areas of this district.
Yeah, I'm hoping that feasibility study, a lot of those things you're talking about, they'll address at least that piece of it, and then you're right, there'll be the number crunching, and, when you add Micron into it, and then the pre-K, those are gonna be the wild card unknowns, but there'll be some kind of exponential to it. Yep. Is there any other questions? Lots of questions, but maybe not yet.
Just in terms of next steps, the feasibility study, and then I'm sure, be doing a lot of follow-up work on these questions. So it sounds like it will be coming to our facilities committee to kind of wrestle with it, but then once we sort of march it along, we can do another follow-up presentation. Because, the piece I'm thinking about is just the legislative piece. We can hope and even advocate, not that our community wants us to advocate pushing the timeline back, but that may or may not move. So we're gonna be either up against a wall with a pretty aggressive timeline, or we're not. So I think it'll be helpful. This is such a helpful presentation and chock full of all great questions. So it'll just be helpful for the committee to dig in with you, and then also bring this forward to the board at the right time.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this will have to come back for periodic visits. I think more information will be forthcoming with the audit, but at the same time, I know some of the superintendents campaign for, much like we did for technology with every other district in New York State, is there an opportunity here to do something similar with electric buses because of the cost involved? So maybe there will be a future referendum that transcends every district, much like for the computers recently. Because there is a concern. Brad listed and scratched the surface with John some of the main issues, but the big fear, and Dan kind of alluded to it, is, there are a lot of other expenses. We'll be sinking an enormous amount. Yes, it's right in terms of a green footprint, but we will be providing the same service that we provide now. You know what I mean? It's not going to be any better. It might be environmentally better, but we're going to have that money in competition with our other needs, academic and so forth, to provide the service that's currently being provided now. And then the big fear too is the number of battery changes that Dan alluded to. You could end up like any of us with our private vehicles, paying on the note still when we no longer have the vehicle. And so I think we've got to be mindful of those calculations as well. If we elect not to replace the battery, if there's something else that becomes problematic.
My only other thought was for the, and I might have said this in our facilities committee, but I think, Marissa, you're attending the National School Boards Association conference. To the extent there's any good content, vendors, presentations on electric buses, it'd be great for, if you'd be willing to bring any of that back to the board and to the team.
Yeah, I think later on, the facilities committee, that's fine if that's, where we want to go with it. But on top of it, we do have opportunities with some of the sales vendors that'd be more than willing. I know we talked to Matthews Buses, Mark Hanrahan, we talked to last Thursday, and they'd be open to coming out and talking about, where they're at and answering questions. But a lot of the unknowns are in the same boat we are, as trying to define them. But I would certainly want to bring somebody like that back, because who better than that kind of a person that, from the manufacturing aspect, would be able to talk to you specifically about where they're at and, what they envision. Okay.
Thank you very
Yep,
much.
thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to move back then to the 2.01 presentation on property tax exemptions. So we have Catherine Gavitt from our law firm here to discuss the available tax exemptions, including the veterans exemption, the fire EMS exemption, and the senior citizens exemption.
Hi, everybody. How are you? I apologize for coming a little bit late. So I'm going to go through these exemptions. They're very complicated. I wish, I try to make it as high level as possible, but I could spend probably an hour just on the alternative veterans exemption if we wanted to. I know no one does. But as I'm going through, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll stop and walk through it a little bit in greater detail. So just to start, real property tax law says that all real property owned is taxable. Means that everybody has to pay taxes, state, town, county taxes on their real property unless it's exempt. Article 4 of the real property tax law outlines various tax exemptions. So two that we're very familiar with, 420A, that's what makes the school district buildings tax exempt, right? We don't have to pay taxes. And 487, so I've been here before in the past to talk to you about 487. That's our wind solar farm waste. I know we've had a couple of different discussions about that. So those are two examples that we're more familiar with. One that I wanted to talk to you about tonight is the alternative veterans exemption. So this one is probably one of the most complicated when it comes to the different levels of exemption that are out there. But really what it comes down to is that it's for residential property for veterans or the spouses of veterans or the unremarried spouses of a deceased veteran. And then there's a base level that can be either, what you do is you set the base level as 15% of the assessed value for veterans who served during the period of war. So this is one level of our base level. Then from there, there's maximums of that percentage that can either be adjusted downward or upward. And I didn't bring the sliding scale so that you could see it. Just generally speaking, you should know the first prong will say of the base level is 15% of the assessed value. The second piece is you can get an additional 10% if you served in a combat zone, in addition to being a veteran of during a period of war. And then there's another piece that you can get in here, our third prong, that there's an additional benefit equal to 1/2 of the service-connected disability rating for disabled veterans. So a veteran who becomes disabled due to service, they can get another 50%. And under that third level, that can be an additional 50% exemption on their total assessment. So it could be sizable overall. So now significant to this is there is no income cap. So in a minute we're going to talk about a couple other ones where the exemptions are set based on income caps. For the veterans exemption, it's not an income cap. The cap relates to the total exemption on the property. But it doesn't base it based on someone who's doing well or somebody who's not doing well financially. So school districts may adjust the amount of the benefits. That's what I talked about, where there's that sliding scale. We can go up or down for the maximums. And then the statutory cap applies to exemption at the level of income. There's also another piece to this, Gold Star parents. So in addition to that base that we just talked about, you can also have parents who are parents of veterans who were killed in service. That's another added, I will say an adder or an add-on that you can do for the veterans exemption. And all of this has to be done by public hearing before the board can act. So what you would do is you'd have your public hearing, you have to have at least 10 days' notice. And then at that point in time, the board can decide what they want to do, if they want to adopt it. And then if they are going to adopt it, then once you adopt the base, you decide if you want to adjust it upwards or downwards or stay where you are. And then a counterpart to the veterans exemption is the Cold War veterans exemption, because that doesn't fall under the active duty, but the law was amended to add on the Cold War, and that's available for residential property owned by veterans who served during the Cold War period. This one, there's 2 levels, 10% or 15%. It's limited to 10 years. Disabled veterans, there's an additional benefit for them. Again, it's that 50% of their connected disability rating, and there's no time limit for them. This is the same thing. You have to have a public hearing before the board can act. So that's a really high-level overview of the veterans exemption. That one's been around for a little while, but is there any questions before I move on to the next one? Okay, so first responder exemption. This is a newer exemption that came out more recently. This relates to, again, it's on the residential real property, and it's for an enrolled member of the volunteer fire department or volunteer ambulance service. So this one, the individuals have to be a resident of FM and also live in the town in which they are a volunteer member of the fire department or ambulance service. So it's a little bit, unless there's like one exception to that. We'll get to that in just a second. But it's a little bit more unique. So, I grew up in Canandaigua. If I lived in Canandaigua, but I volunteered in town of Bloomfield, I wouldn't be able to get the exemption. So it was really designed to support fostering more volunteerism within that town itself. So this is up to 10% of the assessed value of the property. It was amended on December 9th, 2022. So this was a pretty significant change. This has been coming in over the years. Like I said, it's newer. When it came in, it used to be every single county had their own subpart under the law. And they're all vary just a little bit. I know, makes it real easy, right? As if it wasn't as complicated as it was. So this past December, they put everything together. And they changed a little bit. But now it's much more uniform, and every county follows one section of the law. And there were caps that were removed under the revised or the amended law. So volunteers with less than 20 years experience. That's that group that I was talking about, where you have to reside within the municipality in which it's served, in which you're serving by the volunteer fire department. It has to be your primary residence, and it has to be used exclusively for residential purposes. Also, you have to have a certification saying that you've been a volunteer for at least 2 years. So I can't go sign up tomorrow and then say, okay, give me my tax exemption. And then there's also annual certification requirements. Really, if you're going to go down this route, we would talk to you about ways to have the assessor do that, because the school district shouldn't be in the process of verifying exemption entitlements. That's really not our role. So volunteer with more than 20 years is the other category that you can have. If you have more than 20 years, you have to have a certification demonstrating that you have at least 20 years of active service. And then you receive the 10% exemption for the remainder of your life. And that can mean that you can move around. So you can be retired, you don't have to be active anymore. That's going to be where I live in Canandaigua, and I volunteered in Bloomfield, but I still get my exemption in Canandaigua School District. Again, that's for once you've reached your 20-year mark. And then unremarried spouse. This extends to unremarried spouse for the lifetime if the deceased spouse had their 20-year exemption and was receiving the exemption on the property at the time that they passed away. And then an unremarried spouse of a volunteer killed in the line of duty may continue to receive the exemption for at least an additional 5 years, as long as they were receiving the exemption at the time that the individual passed away. So any questions on that one? So the other one, senior citizens exemption. So this has been around, and it was recently, the eligibility limitations were recently increased. It used to be pretty negligible, and not a lot of people had taken advantage of this. This is Real Property Tax Law 467, and it provides real property tax exemption to senior citizens. This one is based on income. So the school district gets to set the income amount. Again, there's various levels. It was just raised The maximum income level is $50,000. If you were to elect to do this, at $50,000, it means that individuals' property would be 50% tax exempt. There's a sliding scale. If they make more than $50,000, each increment it goes down, 45, 40, et cetera, till you get down to 5%, and then you can max out. And then you must have, again, same with this one, you must have a public hearing before the school board can act. So with respect to these, again, really, yeah, go ahead.
So just to clarify, on the senior
Yeah.
citizens, it's not at all based on assets?
No.
It's just income?
Just income.
Okay.
Yes, so I could have, you know, an incredible $2.5 million home and still get the exemption. And again, the senior citizens one has been around for a little while, but it's new in the fact that the income maximum was just increased to the point where it's now starting to come to the forefront and people are considering it. Just a couple years ago, the maximum was only about $20,000 of income, so no one was really looking at this one. So where we are with these is what we've been talking to all of our school districts about, especially because the senior citizens one is really popular this year. The firefighters, first responders was last year and this year too, is you need to take some time and think about, like, get some information from your assessor. We have a lot of school districts that are forming committees, advisory committees to really, we just heard about feasibility studies, really understanding the impact. So what's going to happen when we give someone the tax exemption is that's going to shift the tax burden onto the other taxpayers. So it's really important for the school district to understand exactly how much money are we shifting onto the other taxpayers before you act. So that's our recommendation, is when you're going through these, to really take some time and make sure you make an informed decision of how is this going to impact our other taxpayers before you do anything else. So there any?
Kathy, on the
Yeah.
senior citizens exemption,
Yeah.
in the law, does it give an age to specify? Is it 62, 65?
I want to say it's 65, but I can confirm. I'm not certain off the top of my head. I think it's 65, but I can confirm, and I can send Dr. Tice an email and let you know. Yeah.
And I just want to confirm that the senior citizen, that's separate from the senior star
Yeah.
exemption?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So you have like your enhanced star for seniors, and then you have this one as well. Which is a good point, right? Because there's a lot of exemptions out there that shift. And and I could have, the number of exemptions under the real property tax law is just overwhelming. So whenever in the school district, some of these we have to opt out, like 487, the school board has decided to opt out, so that way we can control the flow of the tax exemption to various entities. And then some of these, like these, we have to opt in, but it's important to make sure that we're taking our time to really understand how it's going to impact all of our taxpayers.
I think that's a good idea to make sure that we have all that data, but I think it's also another track that we should be taking is advocating for the state to fund these exemptions, because, that's the elephant in the room, basically, is the state gets to say politically we are giving these exemptions to these very deserving groups of people. However, they're not funding it, and they're passing it on to the school districts to do, which puts the school districts in the position of the bad guy, possibly, of saying no. So, I think as a district, that's something that we should be continuing to advocate for the state to fund these.
Yeah. And our firm has been school district law firm since our creation. And Marissa, we're right there with you. We understand that the financial burden that's put on the school district with a lot of unfunded state mandates, or in this case, the tax exemptions that put greater pressure on the school district. So I understand. In your role, you probably have better ability to bring that about than I do. But we actually have been working, even with your pilots, with the legislators and through the associations to try to get some impacts, or some relief from school districts for like the pilots. And with all of the new property and the new growth that comes in here, I'm sure, as you know, that doesn't help your growth rate. So when you have a property come in through a pilot agreement, you can't increase your levy limit as new growth because it came in through a pilot, which shouldn't happen. Because because a lot of our growth right now is coming through pilots. So we are trying to aid the school district in some of these effects that I don't think the state recognizes. But I think your point is very well taken.
So, you go ahead, Sarah.
Go ahead. Well, I was just gonna say, so, you know, we're talking about maybe doing a feasibility analysis or more study, but have we looked at, you know, how much that would cost to dive in? And we can get all the facts and the figures and good to make decisions based off of those numbers, but, you know, kind of backing up to look at, you know, what is the benefit to our students and to our core purpose for evaluating any of the exemptions before we decide to spend, I don't know how much money in actually gathering all of the data, because it's very complicated. There's a lot of options and all of those kinds of things. So I guess I would just, you know, want us to give careful consideration before we go down a path of spending a lot of taxpayer money trying to study it. Did it pass the first bar to say our students are going to benefit by us spending this money to evaluate it?
As the board is aware, before Mr. Furlong departed as Assistant Superintendent for Business Services, we attended a meeting with other municipalities. And at the time, we were looking at all of these exemptions. The idea was to get more data in terms of the number of individuals in not just FM, but the other school districts within the town of Manlius as an example, such as ESM. Since that time, the committee didn't get that information. Everybody is kind of doing their own thing. So to answer Sarah's question, because everybody's doing their own thing, some are using the sliding scale, others are not. By the time the January tax bills get prepared, our assessor says we may have some of that data at our fingertips already. So rather than just making a decision right now, closing our eyes and our heart tells us one thing and our head says to do the research, I think those January tax bills will have the information that we need. So I don't think we'll be expending a lot. I think we'll be able to see what the other municipalities are doing. As far as school districts, right now I believe at this time, and that may change by January, it's just Lafayette and West Genesee are honoring the veterans exemptions. I know ESM is doing the fire and EMS. So right now it's just firing a starter pistol and everybody's headed off in different directions based on their stakeholder groups and advocacy and constituency. So if you're asking for an administrative recommendation, I agree with council. I would rather make an informed decision and have things sort out between my heart and my head versus just closing my eyes and hoping for the best.
So when you get the information from the tax bill, so then we'll be able to tell the community how much, or pretty close to how much it would cause an increase for other people's taxes if we were to do each one of these or all of them?
Correct. As you know, Mr. Furlong and Mr. Corbin verified it as well. We have an idea of what the ballpark is, but those January tax bills, it won't be perfect, but it'll be a sample size that will let us know how many individuals for each of the exemptions have put in for it. So that's what I'm going after. So as far as the advocacy group, I think we can start that sooner than later. I don't want to be here a year from now making this decision. I'd rather see what those January tax bills, have our debates and discussions earlier with all groups represented, and then be able to hold our hearings, as Ms. Gavitt said, in a timely fashion before March 1st.
Wow, so you like before this March 1st? Or next March 1st?
Next March
That's what I
1st,
thought.
2024.
What data specifically are you referring to that isn't otherwise available today? What is there that would be on these tax bills that's not accessible today?
Which individuals qualify and have signed up for those exemptions? That was the whole purpose of the meeting when Mr. Furlong was still here this summer, is get us the data. The reason we never had a follow-up meeting with all the other municipalities we met at the town of Manlius Hall, was, I think, because people had not signed up for the different exemptions, it was a shot in the dark. So it wasn't just census data they were going for, they were actually looking for the people who signed up for those different exemptions, and they didn't have that at their fingertips. So it wasn't laziness, it wasn't that they just pushed the meeting back. They were looking not just census data, who would qualify, but who actually signed up for it.
The question is, doesn't that same data exist in this past January's tax bill?
Not if the exemptions and the sliding scales and all of that hasn't been settled on by the different municipalities. Oh.
So Craig, I guess maybe a point of clarification, when you talk about the sliding scales in the municipalities, do we know where everybody sits right now in terms of the village? Because if I understand it right, we've got the village of Fayetteville, the village of Manlius, the town of Manlius. Is there anybody I'm missing? And I don't mean to slight anyone, but off the top of my head, those are the three that pop out. Is there anybody else?
Village of Manoa, ESM, school district, and no, I don't know what the specifics are at this point.
But we need them to act first or in conjunction with us before we can approve it. Is that right?
I think the idea is to use the data as a way to survey who's signing up for the different exemptions, correct?
Jason and Dan, I was just gonna say something to you guys quick. Your questions are, so I talked to Pat Duffy last week, town of Manlius, and just chatted about basically these three items and just as far as the data went. So veterans, we got some information from, as Craig had alluded to, when Bill got that this summer, we were able to do some calculations based on that. It's not going to be 100% effective if there's other people who had signed up, et cetera, but based on prior year's data, that's kind of what that alluded to. The other two pieces being firefighters, so the village of, I think village of Manlius, town of Manlius has moved it forward. I think he thought the village of Fayetteville was moving it forward, and I think the head count was somewhere in the 57 to 60 range or something to that extent. He wasn't sure the actual dollar impact, but heads-wise, that's roughly what he had said, and he'll know more. The big one I was chasing at that point was the senior citizens aspect. So I said, is there any way to get some kind of quantifying? And I'm not sure who would ask the question, but for the board level, I think the question came through an email, and that's where I was chasing that. So Pat said he'd contacted the state. What he was asking for from the state was, can you give us any kind of a preliminary heads up of what folks we'd have potentially on the tax rolls that would be over that 65, I think 65 was the number, and then it'd be income limit driven, so we'd need some kind of defining number there, and then based on those numbers, we'd be able to extrapolate out what would that impact be. And the state said absolutely not, we will not be giving you that information, personal, whatever their reasoning was. So I asked Pat, I'm like, how we're gonna be able to provide this, because, basically, it's kind of talking like Craig, where you're going to basically go in blind from that aspect. I'm like, how are we going to come through with some kind of calculated impact? Because this will be a large shift, or at least be a shift in some way, shape, or form to the other taxpayers. And he said, from the town of Manlius aspect, if it goes through, which he believes it is, that information, he might be able to take that information and extrapolate it out and figure what that impact would be for the school district. So he said, if you did go to a situation where you were going to wait that 1 year, that information he would provide and be able to calculate it, extrapolate it out, and figure out what would the school district impact be from that aspect. But he said as far as getting that information to give you in advance to meet, the March deadline, he said it's just absolutely they wouldn't give in. So that's what I know. I haven't talked to any other districts as far as how far they've gotten or anything. I'm certainly, we could do that, but with us it was specifically what I was chasing was for here.
Is that big one, right? Because that one is the one that no one was really watching until very recently. And it's impossible to predict because we don't know what people are making it. With the firefighters, I guess you could call the fire departments and say who's in there, who could possibly qualify. You still have that over 20 years. But the seniors is the hard one. And I know I have one school district where they said they think the financial impact is going to be very significant. So that's the problem, is you don't know. Any other questions?
I think that's where I was trying to get the question. We can answer this very easily on the fire and EMS one. We
yeah,
can
we will,
answer this, I think, fairly simply on the veterans one. Those records exist and they're accessible. The senior citizen one is the quantifiable, predictable one that is just completely missing from the equation.
it's my understanding at this moment, you haven't quite finished compiling the firefighters one. And the senior citizen one, yes, it's completely missing, but hopefully, once we get those bills in, the school district will be able to evaluate that. And from the question regarding the feasibility study, I mean, you two can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's a feasibility study like we're looking at for the electric buses. This is more just internally the district trying to understand it so they can bring back information to the board. So it's not a cost and I understand your concern regarding cost, but I don't see this being a feasibility study issue where we're talking other things. Because I get it, feasibility studies can be expensive. This is more of just compiling information so that way we can bring it back to all of you to make sure that you understand what's being asked of you.
Just so I'm clear then, Craig, is there an administrative recommendation on what direction we're going with this?
As I said earlier, to do a study based on the January tax bills, to start a Citizens Advisory Tax Committee. I think we owe it not just to the veterans, the senior citizens, and fire and EMS, but I think we owe it to everybody else as the burden gets shifted to them to let them see what the numbers are. So I think we can do that sooner rather than later, and then to hold our hearings in the winter well in advance of March 1st.
To be clear, is a hearing actually then a recommendation? I mean, if we're having a hearing, then that is a suggestion for an exemption, or not necessarily? I know it's a requirement to have a hearing and school board approval, but to even have a hearing, I mean, that means you're putting forth some sort of exemption. I'm just trying to understand the steps, because don't we ultimately need to decide as a board if we're going to move forward with any exemptions or some exemptions?
Correct.
Before a hearing?
Exactly. My reference to the hearing is don't wait to the 11th hour, like with March 1st on our doorstep. Be able to post it for the 10 days, do it well in advance sometime in the winter so that we can have the hearings sooner.
That the committee, you would put together an advisory committee, and they would help us with a recommendation that we could discuss and then come to a decision so that we could put forward something for the hearing. Is that?
Correct. If an advisory committee gives the board the final say, there's more latitude. You'll get to be able to look at the advantages and limitations as a board and end up making the final decision. The other option is to put it before the voters. The voters could decide as a referendum, and then you get no option. So it is or it isn't, and you live and die by it. So it could go through, and there would be applause from some camps, or it could not pass, and there would be applause from another camp. So I think having it rest with the board is what legal counsel is saying. Get the information first. Don't just take a shot in the dark.
Dr. Tice, if it was a referendum, would it be a referendum like the voters would be voting on each individual one, or would it be a package that we would put forward and saying this is what we want to do?
I'll leave that to legal counsel. It could be our discretion on how that, probably separate is my guess.
Our recommendation would be, where we've seen this be the most successful is having the advisory committee, and the veterans exemption, like I said, has been out for a while. Having the advisory committee, having the public hearing. In the past, what we've seen is the advisory committee comes and they do a presentation like I'm doing with the board. They explain it. The veterans, the one that I did not too long ago with the veterans, the advisory committee had recommended certain levels because there's so many different levels. And then veterans spoke even before the public hearing. And then it went back to the board again for further consideration even before the public hearing. So that's a way for you to really take into consideration the community input and then have the option to weigh the potential tax shifts to your other taxpayers. So that's where we've seen it work typically.
Catherine?
Yeah.
So hypothetically, if I were a little over 65.
Yep.
And I did 4 years in the Army, and I also was an EMT for 10 years.
Nope, you gotta get 20. Do 20 unless you're active.
I did 20, yes.
Okay.
Do I get all 3 exemptions?
Okay, so I have to make sure, but because some of the exemptions of the real property tax law say that they're the exclusive one and you can't get multiple, so I'd have to see how they all interplay, but there is a potential for you, and they also, some are the total exemption, so like veterans exemption is the total exemption on your property, it's a cap of the value, whereas the seniors is a little bit different. So we'd have to go through, I'd have to really play them all together, but there is definitely a potential, and that's something I can look at to see how they all interplay, because some of them will say you can't overlap, and some of them say it's okay. And I don't have that memorized off the top of my head, but yes, yeah, you're right, and it's, I'm sure it's not unusual, or not, I say, I'm sure there's a possibility there's someone out there who served, even in the Cold War, and also was active as a volunteer firefighter, and may qualify for both, and may now be a senior citizen. So, yeah, we can look, I will also look and see how the interplay goes, because that would be relevant information for your consideration.
And just one last clarification. The final determination
Yep.
is a board determination or a public vote determination?
Typically, it's a board, that's what we recommended. So you would have your public hearing, and then the board would pass a resolution, would be our recommendation, after you have the information to make an informed decision, is our legal recommendation.
There's probably going to be other districts that are going to be going through this similar,
Yeah.
especially with the senior citizens, so we'd also have that information of kind of what is going on.
Yeah.
If we answer the one, my dad is a Vietnam vet, was a fire chief, and is also a senior citizen, so I know
Yeah.
he's already been chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
And the senior citizens, I wasn't trying to be evasive on Dan's question. Some are going right to the $50,000 limit. Others are staircasing it in, which is a nightmare too, to try to better understand. So I'm telling you, they fired a starter pistol and everybody went off in a different direction.
Yeah, we did. We have one county a little bit farther in the west that told everybody just to adopt the senior citizens exemption, told all the school districts at this level, be it by March 1st, and made it a very public issue, so there was significant pressure on the school districts. And they hadn't been able to do, some said yes under public scrutiny, and others said no, because they don't know the financial impact. And it's tough to find out once all the tax bills go out.
Just want to echo, it's to what Marissa said at the beginning of this, that this is one of the most fundamentally unfair pieces of legislation that's been foisted on local government. Because Craig, you said it too. The obvious answer is that we want to recognize as most and best we can every veteran that served, everyone who serves our community and our senior citizens, without question. But the impact of that is there's a financial shift to the rest of the community in an unknown amount, many of whom are on fixed income in a district in which we have extraordinarily high taxes as is, and as we heard earlier, tremendous expenses coming in the immediate future. And it just places local municipalities like school boards in an absolutely untenable position.
Bad guys either way.
Yeah.
On
Police.
top of it, and there's 3 different exemptions, so,
Yeah.
ideally, are you going to choose, what are you saying doesn't matter?
Yeah. At least with the advisory committee, that will allow you to better assess what makes sense to the district versus, rushing to judgment now, because like Dr. Tice said, someone's shot a starter pistol and some people are just running, and that's not always the best approach.
So Dr. Tice, based on your administrative recommendation, it sounds like a rough time table would be getting an advisory committee together sometime, I guess, before the fall, and then having them do some research, and then having their information given to the board prior to some hearings in, were you thinking like November, January, or somewhere in there?
In talking with Mr. Duffy, right, the tax bills, we should have a better idea. They go out in January, the preparation is November, December, so it would be around that time we would have the data. But that certainly, you said, we could start the conversation, the qualitative piece, before the quantitative piece.
And I certainly appreciate and respect the recommendation of having the board make the decision, that there is a possibility, or there is actually room for a referendum if the board wanted to go in that direction. not recommended by council, but I just want to make sure that, because if the advisory committee is going to look at it, they should have all the information, so that's a possibility, but not the recommendation.
I'm going to double check to make sure that that is an option.
Craig, what do you envision this advisory committee looks like? Because just as this is an untenable thing that it puts local municipalities into, it very much would set its same thing up in an advisory committee setting, where you have a group of senior citizens who have an interest, and people who are not eligible have an interest. And I just envision setting up a committee that just creates conflict within the committee because it puts them in the same untenable position that we sit here today in. So what do you envision that would even look like?
Well, I'm hoping it's not a knockdown, drag-out for everybody involved. I think it really is getting to the numbers and being able to better understand the shift. You're right, it's untenable. And I know when we went through something similar in the district I used to work in, the veterans stepped up and said, it's just untenable. We didn't serve to have it shifted to other, our neighbors. And I know ESM ended up with a similar conversation. It doesn't mean these districts aren't revisiting it, but I think the question becomes, because it does pit neighbor against neighbor, what are the numbers so people can understand it? If it's a pittance, then it's an easy decision. If it's a large amount, then I think you're really wrestling with it.
My question is, if it's about the numbers and coming to the numbers, we don't need an advisory committee to come to the numbers. I would be very hesitant to go down the advisory committee path because I don't see a good outcome of that. I don't see that as productive because it's just going to be weighing objective, quantitative numbers. And honestly, it's how many are in each category as it votes down. I'm not sure that there's a favorable outcome of that versus let's just pull all the actual numbers together and then present that out to the community.
Or as Ms. Mims argued, I think advocating through our legislature to not have it be a local decision.
Well, I think we can do both. I agree with Dan that this could become a whole, divisive issue with an advisory committee of the different people representing the different groups. And perhaps instead of that, what we need to focus on is community education. Once we get the information, making sure all of those stakeholders who possibly could benefit from this are aware of the numbers and the background information to it and what our options are, so that when they have the public hearings, they could come and give us their opinion, and then we could, as a board, it sounds like that's the direction we're moving in, make the decision. We had hearings before, or I can't remember if it was an actual hearing, but we did have a lot of people who came to the board several years ago when this issue came up, and we had people on both sides of it, who were able to benefit from the exemptions but felt they didn't want to pass the burden on to other taxpayers, and people who were in favor of it. We listened to everyone and made a decision back then. So I agree that Dan's making a great point that an advisory committee, you could have a very split committee. So perhaps that is the focus that we need to do, is more of the community education piece. Anybody else have a thought on that? Maybe someone who hasn't spoken yet?
I think the numbers are really, that's an internal, that's Brad leading us forward with what does that look like. And as Dan said, with the EV discussion, looking at it in the broader context of what are our budgetary needs going to look like over time, because this is a commitment for a long period of time, and particularly with the seniors, that number is going to balloon out. We know those numbers are going to grow exponentially. So to me, it's a quantitative analysis. It's certainly a qualitative analysis too, and a conversation. But as tough as it is for it to be a board, to be foisted on the board, I think it's an internal discussion at the end of the day, and a decision we have to make with as much data and discussion. So I don't think we're prepared to have that conversation tonight, but I think those are the conversations we're going to need to have with more information. I'm not in favor of an advisory committee. I would be in favor of helpful information if there's community members that can provide information that come and speak, but I personally don't think we need to to launch a committee effort now. I think it'll also extend the timeline quite a bit.
And I'm in agreement that initially, I'm always someone who wants to talk, wants to bring it to the community, wants to hear all the voices, but in this circumstance, it's just gonna end up with, people who are only out for themselves. I mean, everybody's in support of everybody, but their interest is their own group, so the data is where we have to go, not the advisory committee.
I haven't heard from everyone, but it sounds like, just looking around the table, that we have consensus to move forward with getting that data, bringing that to board meetings so we can have discussion, making sure we educate the public so that they're aware of the process as we move forward, which board meetings this will be discussed at, and then having some hearings before the board makes a decision. Am I correct? I see everyone's nodding. Okay. All right. Oops.
Can we just agree to park this on, not to park it, we're gonna move forward with it, but tag it on agenda items of just working agenda items, so that we have that as a persisting matter, so that as we get data, that's can pop right back up onto the working agenda.
Certainly, good idea.
So can I just ask, do we feel like there's a threshold that we would say yay or nay to? I mean, we could get the data to be able to educate the community about how we base our decision, but I guess we're still going to be wrestling with, okay, so if it's 10 people or 10,000 people, that is something that we will have to work out. And so what do we think is our process for doing that? Just we look at the data and we go, oh, that's interesting, or that's a lot, or that's a little. I'm just personally struggling with, and I get, I agree that this is kind of a crappy thing to come down on the school district, but, I think these are 3 great groups, but I think that there are all sorts of other deserving groups also, and it's hard because, we're gonna get some data, and then we're still gonna be sitting here looking at it and go, well, okay, that only shifts $10 per $100,000 home assessment. Is that the right amount, or too much, or too little? I guess I keep coming back fundamentally to, how much is this going to impact our overall student body? And we're in the business of education, and we have to respond to the community and to the community members. But, we're not we are tax collectors, but we're not tax experts. And I'm not sure what threshold I would look at the data and go, okay, that makes it worth it to our students to take this particular group or that particular group and shift the burden on others. And I'm worried that we're going to have another year that goes by, and we're going to get all the numbers and work them more accurately from this January's tax call, and then we're going to sit here and have the same conversation. And are we going to make a decision, I guess? And I'm not really, I don't have a proposed solution about it per se, but I just want to raise it as at what point do we have a threshold that we define?
I don't know if we can look at this particular issue in terms of like how it benefits students, because it's not like a building or something like that. But I get where your point, because we have a lot of different levels of income and people in this district. So an increase is going to hit different people, impact them very differently. I think we have to look at it in context of everything else we have coming on our plate. So we have to look at that. So if we look at this every year, because each year we ask the taxpayers for a little bit more, and we try to keep that increase, but it's a little bit more. And to people who, a lot of people seem to think that, people out in Manlius, everybody is living, very wealthy, which is not true. So we keep asking for a little bit more and a little bit more every year. So we have to look at it in context of all that, and then listen to the people who come and talk to us and tell us how it would impact them. And then we have to make a decision. I think we really actually have to make a firm decision this time. So I think that's how I would look at it. That is how I would look at it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I've had the same exact concerns as you, and I think even thinking about the tax burden being shifted in is almost regressive, right? Because it's being shifted equally, but it's not equitable when you think about the different levels of income. So some people are gonna be affected differently. So, yeah, I mean, we can research this again, and you're right, like what number are we okay with? But, you know, maybe that's at least showing the community that we've talked about it, we've researched it, we looked at it, and at the end of the day, it's gonna be those of us sitting here who have to come up with a decision. We're gonna have to base it on whatever we have to base it on. So maybe it's just the nature of it, but I strongly think that we should be advocating to the state, like per other, you know, like other things, that the burden should be, and if the state's gonna allow these exemptions, then the state needs to fund it.
I can reach out to others on the OCMBOC's board and see if we can do something jointly so that all of our districts are advocating for that together.
Sarah, I think the one potential difference to it at this point, and as it's been to this point, is there's a required public hearing. It isn't limited to just one hearing. That's our choice, whether there's more than one. And I think this is something that when we actually have the numbers, that it's, to me at least, it would be tremendously valuable to hear from a wider swath of this community. Because ultimately, yes, there's 9 people that were elected to make the decision, but it impacts huge, disparate portions of our district, and in very different ways, and from household to household to household. And I would very much look forward to that. If we had the data now, I'd love to have that now. I'd love to start those now, but I don't think it's meaningful until you actually have the data and are able to say, if this one passes at this level, here's the amount that shifts per 100,000. And I think you have to have the quantitative, but I think the input from the community, at least to me, would be the most valuable information that we could possibly have toward this.
I guess I did have one other question, is, so assuming, you know, when you make a decision, is it valid for 1 year, forever, until somebody changes it? Or what is it something that comes up on a periodic cycle?
That's a great question. So up until that change that we just had with the first responders, once you made that decision, that was good, and then they brought all the laws together, and they're saying that you need to renew it within the next 3 years if you've already approved it. Then that's set. With the veterans, once you make it, you're there, you can adjust the levels following the same process. Same with the senior citizens. So this isn't an annual thing. You may need to visit it annually if you find that something's changing. Like the senior citizens, like I said, the threshold was so low. And since it's an income maximum, you know, as cost of living go up, a $20,000 threshold for your income really is not enough to make anybody qualify. So that's something that you may visit more often than once for the entire, you know, next decade. But with all of these laws, once you enact them, they're in place until you rescind them, all these exemptions. Unless the law changes again, because like I said, like the first responders, they just did that renewal piece, but as of now. Any more questions? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you, everybody.
much.
It's nice to see everybody again.
Nice to see you. Okay, so we will move on now to item 2.03, the 2023-24 budget proposal. It's a 3-part budget, and this is the capital expenditures portion. Brad?
Here I am back. Yeah. Well, we'll talk a little more. So thank you. We'll be talking about the capital budget tonight. I know this is going to be a little bit of a change maybe than the last few years in how the presentation went. Usually the way I've done it was really a 3-part budget. I know that does kind of dovetail with what you guys put out from actually your document, where you'll see it broken down in that aspect and show it to the community in that way, and I thought it made sense to kind of maybe follow that route. So my plan tonight was to talk about the capital portion of the budget, and you'll see kind of a timeline at the end, and we'll talk about, what we'll talk about for the subsequent parts of the budget, and at the same time, my plan was to provide that document that would be a three-part thing that we'd be putting out to the community, as well as with those two, with the program component as well as with the admin component, and then you can kind of see if people want to see if things have changed or how that's going to look overall. You'd have that capability as well. So capital component of the budget, in this case, we're projected to increase year over year approximately $75,000, or basically a 0.5%. Current projections call for a capital budget of about $14.9 million. We'll talk about what's driving that. So within capital, there's debt service. Debt service is made up of the capital project debt, bus purchase debt, EPC debt, or energy performance contracts, and capital transfer. Within debt service, it's about $7.9 million. Debt service components projected to decrease actually year over year about 2.3%, and we'll talk about that. So capital project debt, you can see left-hand side is your account code. In the middle is the current 22-23 current budget that was adopted last year, and then 23-24 would be your projected budget. So the first one that sticks out is going to be the decrease from the $3.788 million in 22-23 down to approximately $3,090,000. So that's really just a shift in the fact of what the debt's coming off. And if you think about it with our case, there's really two things. And one, you can see the bullets below, the previous debt coming off the books. The majority of this decrease we're going to talk about later on, where it'll be shifting over to the capital transfer portion of the budget. So approximately about $700,000 is coming off, and then we're going to talk about a cap transfer increase of $500,000. We'll talk about what we're going to do with that subsequently. Why the actual debt's coming off in that aspect is really with the capital project, with that referendum, there was $7.2 million worth of capital reserve funds that was allocated to the project, and I believe as of currently we're somewhere around $5 million still available that would be used to pay for those the corresponding project funds. So at this point, there's no need to go out and do a ban. We'll use those existing funds as they were allocated, and then save that debt for a later day, and we'll talk about that as well. Bus purchase debt is the next item. You can see basically the first two items of the actual bus bonds, and you can see in the first bullet below that the purchase of 6 new diesel buses using bus bonds, and you can see the corresponding increase from the 538 up to the 711, and that reflects really just the change, an increase in the price cost, as John was talking about earlier, with the manufacturing costs having risen. That's really what represents that, and then the one below it, the actual bus ban is actually being paid off, and this is the last year. I think you banned maybe about 5 years ago at this time instead of bonding for it, and that basically is the last ban payment that represents that that's being removed. EPC project debt is next, and you can see there it's basically at an existing balance of about $200,000. With the current payment in 22-23, that would decrease down to a remaining balance of about $135,000 in principal and the $3,648 for the interest portion. So that'll be expiring soon. Capital transfer, so as I talked about with the actual debt portion decreasing by the $700, here's where you're going to see a little bit of the offset where that $500,000 would be increased. So in 22-23, the plan was for Fayetteville Elementary, the AC, and then for Enders Road, the storefront entrance, and those are both moving forward. So those funds, ideally that $1.5 million would be utilized to do those two main things. And in 23-24, I had a whole list of items, and then the $2 million increase I was hoping was going to take care of a lot of it. The Mott Road AC, just finding out recently that we're projected somewhere around the $1.4 million. So I'm kind of hoping that number would drop a little bit, because we've got about 3 or 4 other maybe smaller items that we'd like to take advantage of, rather than putting a capital project that we could do. And then the Mott Road bathroom renovations, there was at least the gang bathrooms there we'd like to renovate, and then there's some classroom bathrooms as well. We're gonna have to look at that from an ADA compliance perspective as well, but that's in the plan. So Russ is doing some current work, looking with John as well as the architect to see what that's gonna entail. So again, if that number, if we find out that that estimate's gonna be different, that'll be something I'll be expanding that list for, and probably go through the facilities committee is where we talk a little bit about what that's gonna entail, and then we'd ideally bring that up to the board level. Maintenance and custodial is the next component within capital. And you can see on the, again, the left-hand side, there's kind of a list of some of the components within it: salaries and wages, equipment, materials and supplies, contractual services, gas, electric, water, and security related. So within this, this portion of the budget, maintenance and custodial is somewhere around $7 million, and the actual projected increase year over year is approximately 3.89%. So within maintenance and custodial, these are the two main salary codes. One's really maintenance, and one other one's being custodial. You can see there that what I've got, this is something that you'll see me do quite a bit of, where I'll talk about it's really just due to contractual wage agreements. I don't usually spell it out as far as what that goes, given contract negotiations and things of that nature, so I'll refer to that. And then if I have anything from budget to actual adjustments. So in some cases where if there was vacation buyouts or contractual language changes, there'll be something I'll reflect in there where I'll try to take all the salary codes and drive them back to the corresponding budgets. Maintenance and custodial equipment. So again, you can see the codes and then the bullets below. So equipment requests in this case for in 23-24, they're going to include things like cleaning equipment, new truck, miscellaneous other equipment. Basically, it's just increasing for the cost. The price increase is really the truck is the one that was kind of driving that. Well, yeah, all right. So then the decrease being attributed to use. So basically, yeah, let's back up. So in the 16-2200, you're going to see an increase there up to the 67, and the 16-21, you got a decrease. So what we've really got is that we're going to have a bit of surplus this year in 22-23. So what I'd like to do is take some of that equipment money and see if we can buy ahead, use funds of the existing current year, turn around, take our equipment replacement plan, talk to Russ and transportation, and talk about what opportunities and needs do we have. So we've identified a few different items that we'd like to put forward. We have somewhere probably around the $350,000 range. What can we purchase ahead, take advantage of current needs, and then ideally save these funds for something for program and things of that nature, and at the same time meet whatever we've got from a equipment replacement plan perspective. So that was the plan with that. Gas, electric, water, and telephone. You can see on the left-hand side, I just added the actual alphabet letter beside each one just to identify it. But you can see for the first one being gas, current price is somewhere around the $368,700 for what we budgeted. I shouldn't say price, what we budgeted. And then for the potential budget in 23-24 would be somewhere around $408,700. The electric, we did see a substantial increase there, and that's based on actual. And that went from 544 budget up to the 634.77, and that's pretty close to actual. So in past days, that would be an area where I would probably be, park some surplus, things of that nature, to try to plan for anything where if you have situations where you have significant price increases or things that maybe you weren't ready for, those would be an area. But in this case, that really represents the actual. Water, you can see an increase budget of about 45, and then we're really sitting somewhere around the $52,000 mark. 51,664, and phone service is really projected to be flat. I think it's a little bit over budgeted, maybe by about 5,000 or something to that. So just budget over budget. I decided to project that out as flat. So for the most part, those really do reflect current, basically pricing impact. A lot of it in the fact of, I think with AC being added to the district, from what I understand, that's increased electric costs. I anticipate, we also at our homes have seen price increases as well from that aspect. I'm not sure what it's going to mean as we add more AC. My anticipation would probably be there would be an increase, and then to the one point we talked about earlier with the first presentation with electric buses, I don't know what that would be, but if it follows the same price line that we're seeing here, then ideally you're going to see an increase there as well. Conferences, travel, and fees, very minimal. Basically kept it flat as far as the conferences went, and fees and dues with having a replacement for Russ. I just moved it up $750 for the new director of facilities, and just in advance of whatever he may need in regards to fees and dues for the association he belongs to. Custodial and maintenance supplies, you're seeing an increase here. Basically, for the most part, everything was really just an increase in prices, and there might have been a little bit of volume for some of the actual supplies they do for cleaning. I think there was a couple of different pieces of technology that had changed from cleaning-wise that they wanted to try out, maybe somewhere around the $20,000 mark, and that really represented the $20,000, really just the added increase in activity. Outside services, so that was, we're going to see potentially a decrease here. We had about $752,000 in the current year, and I'm projecting to go down to maybe about $700,000 there. and really some of the area of focus between, things like equipment and things that we can do in advance. You can see here where we've got examples of outside service costs, include some HVAC repairs and controls, maintenance agreements, building general repairs with roofs and windows, storage trailers with a Verdi. So that's one piece of it itself, where I'd like to take that and buy ahead through using equipment money. It's about $60,000 by itself with 6 to 8 trailers. I anticipate needing that for the current project as well as the next subsequent project. I think here we've rented them maybe in the past. At my previous district, we bought them. By the time you get done renting them and using them for what you're doing, you basically could have bought the thing and then turn around and do a resale if you do it. Or we have a bad habits of holding on to everything, and that's where, the closet space is. So I don't want to see a big fleet of Verdi trailers around here, but everybody you talk to, we don't seem to let go of our stuff sometimes. But so that's one aspect, and then trash service is another example of that. Services from BOCES, that's basically, I'm just projecting it to be flat. The services themselves, I didn't anticipate any change in those areas. Examples of the services we're talking about really health and safety related, so the health and safety coordinator, as well as health and safety workshops and trainings. There might be a slight change in those numbers based on when we get the BOCES actual price increases and whatever they're going to be, but at this point, it's really year over year anticipated to be relatively flat. Security, so this will be some change here. So you can see on the first item, at the current year, roughly $135,000, and projecting to go down to approximately $37,000. Same thing at the $73,000 down to the $26,500. So really what we're hoping here is this would be the intrusion system. I think we've talked a little bit about this maybe in some of the groups in regards to Assemblyman Sturpey talking to Dr. Tice about maybe a potential opportunity for the district to receive some what they call bullet aid, maybe somewhere in the ballpark of somewhere, anywhere between 100, 200,000, something like that. So one of the things Dr. Tice asked was there any opportunities that we could use it for, and I thought, the intrusion systems for Fayetteville, Enders Road, and Eagle Hill, and that's somewhere probably in that ballpark, anywhere around 150,000, give or take, of what that dollar cost would be. And then security supplies is the second item down there. That decrease would be as we basically put in new security equipment, the need or the cost for repairs and things of that nature wouldn't be as great in the current year, and that'd be something later on we'd probably have to talk about, but at this point there wouldn't be a need for those dollars. So if that comes through, that would really alleviate that, that purchase there. Next steps, so the admin component, March 13th, I'll be talking about the administrative component. And again, I'll be probably talking about actually bringing the document where it would be the 3-part and then showing there's what we've got from capital that exists, what we're going to have for admin, and then ideally when we get to do March 27th, we'll talk about program. That would be your 3 components. We put that all together, and that would exist in the 3-part format. I'll also present the revenue component, so ideally you'd have the budget at that point from the 3 parts as well as the corresponding revenue to offset the appropriations. I think Dr. Tice had mentioned there'll be a potential contingent budget meeting on April 10th if needed, and then ideally you'd have that time between March 27th and April 17th to basically marinate over kind of what we're talking about with the considerations for the budget, ask questions, things of that nature, and then ideally adopt the budget at that April 17th date. Budget hearing we have identified as May 8th, and then the budget vote, as most of you already know, would be that Tuesday, May 16th. So that represents the presentation. And I'd like to ask if you have any questions.
Really high level, just can you go to the very last slide?
Yep.
So are you suggesting that we're not going to actually see your projected budget till 7 days before we're to vote on adopting it or not?
No, you're going to, March 27th, you'll have the full budget. And then April 17th, so like you'll have basically 3 weeks to have the full. When I do the admin component, I'm going to also give you the capital portion at that point as well. Okay. But I want to give you at least like 3 weeks with it. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
I ran into that at the previous district, and they said, you're not going to ask me to basically vote and adopt that budget on the last 10 minutes, are you? So, yep, understood.
You can thank me for turning their retreats into working meetings, so don't mention it.
I do appreciate it. Are there other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you. I like this format a lot. For the bus purchases debt, maybe you saw this question coming, but we have purchased 6 new diesel buses using bus bonds. So is the plan right now to continue with that purchase of 6 a year until we have a more formal plan for the electric piece? Because I'm just thinking about not making wasteful purchases. I know that we usually do need 6 new buses just based on our current fleet. But I'm just curious how we're thinking about that this year and beyond.
It really gets into, everything we've talked about. The decisions you're facing aren't easy. If they were, we wouldn't be having the debates we're having and the discussions you're having. You're not alone. When I put it together, I try to put it in a format where it makes it easy for you guys to have a decision that, makes sense. Who's it going to impact, and ultimately is it for the students, and, what impact is it for it? With the buses, it's one of those, it's such an unknown at this point. It's kind of the phone aspect of where do you go get version 1? What does that model look like? How is it going to work? Is it something you're going to go park on the side and we're never really going to be using it because we don't know how to trust it, or, what's it going to do for us? It's one thing to, we have it and there's some identified short run, but then you got to have a grid station and the whole thing with the charging. I don't know where to put it. I mean, I'm not a little guy, and to go walk between 2 of those buses, there is no room. I'm not kidding you, there's no room, and if you haven't been down there, go down there and see it. The feasibility study is really going to be the impact there, and figure out what that looks like. To Dan's point, what is the state aid impact and what's going to be aidable for it? But if a bus is going to end up costing $800,000 to $900,000, the thing to say, which I was a little nervous about, kind of talking through the committee side, was I'm going to come off as negative with this, but being an accountant my entire life and an auditor for 10 of the years, it was one of those I'm looking for, does this make sense? And ideally, you're putting kids in the same thing you have now. There will be, the carbon footprint ideally would change. What did it cost from $180,000 to whatever that number is? I don't know the answer. I wish there'd be, a timeline pushed out so we could have a better opportunity to look at it, and I wish they'd also do something with a hydrogen fuel cell. If these things exist in tractor trailers or whatever large vehicles they have, and it's something they're working, and we can go get comparative data and use that, then what's the difference if it's zero, emission from that aspect versus electric? Because for us, the electric's going to kill us on the fact of if we can't put it in the footprint we have, there's whatever that cost is for us to go put, a new facility together for it. If we can use the existing facility and it's just a bus cost, it's obviously going to be a less impactful number. I know I didn't exactly answer everything, but.
No, I appreciate all of those considerations, and I'm just thinking about we're going to continue to purchase the old way, and then in short order we may need to retire that fleet. And I'm also, maybe you address this or not, but is there any value? Is there any, what can we do with those buses? Can we sell them? What are the things that we can do to try to recoup some of those losses? Because it's just.
I think the answer there is a resale value to them. Ultimately, if that's what we need to do, because certainly, we had a leasing program at Tully, and I'm not recommending it for here, but that's what I walked into for 10 years. That's how we purchased buses. So at the end of 6th year, you had the option to purchase the vehicle at basically a 30% or 25%, whatever it was, cost. And ideally, Matthews would turn around and buy it, and they would sell it to some other, origin, destination, whatever, and take those funds. There was a market, whether it's, New York State and California at this point, I believe, that are really on the electric forefront. There's other places that aren't, and I'm sure that there would be, a population that would purchase those. So there would be that capability. I mean, the other piece I didn't really bring up during it is going to be, this will be put in front of you guys for a vote, from that aspect, or not you guys, but the actual community itself. I don't know what that looks like if it goes down. If enough people are concerned there, then you have another discussion. So there's going to be a whole lot to discuss and think about, whether we just get the one and qualify for the 2020, 2027 aspect and go forward. But I am scared in the sense of taking, 65 fleet, dividing that into whatever number of years. That's going to be a tough number to go grab. And so we're going to get stuck at some kind of Model 1 if she's really, if we're going to be held to those date lines. So next year is really probably the real short answer. My long answer to a short answer is really going to be, that 24-25 budget. I don't know how we can't talk about electric there. I'm hoping there'll be data. I hope it gets pushed out, but at this point, it's already in motion, as John said, to go get a diesel bus. We're talking, I think I tell you, I think I had to buy it like last spring and hope that the boat went through. So I was waiting like a year in gambling. But they're like, you're not gonna have a bus if you don't do it. I'm like, okay, well, how's that work? My bus comes off lease. Well, so it's just, I hated Gray as an auditor, and I'm living in it now, so. Sorry for rambling.
I think the safe part of that, though, is that we know we keep these buses on average 10 years, right? So if under the current schedule they're to be phased out by 2035, the buses that we're talking about purchasing now are, that's
Ideally,
longer than
yep.
that 10-year window. So it's a valid question, Rebecca, that how long do we continue doing it the same? But I don't think it's necessarily a this budget year question. I think we start getting into it a little bit more next year and definitely the year following. Because these buses that we would purchase off of this will live their full useful life out before that the current mandatory cut date.
That's a good point.
Good point. Are there other questions?
And to add to the fun to that, if we change the start times as we did the study in terms of, what's that? We're gonna need more buses and drivers.
There's a lot open. I mean, the pre-K and Micron, it's, I don't know. My head's spinning. So, well, thank you. Yep.
Brad? Don't go too far, you never know.
Yeah.
Okay. Item 2.04, President's Report. I'll be brief. We had our retreat. Most of us were able to attend. There were two major topics of discussion, religious holidays. The board is going to be having ongoing discussions about how we can look at our calendar, or how we should look at our calendar. We've had some requests from different religious groups to recognize certain holidays, and we're looking for a process to determine what we do in regards to recognition of holidays that keeps in mind the law, separation of church and state, and also the dynamics of our community, because we want to make sure that we have students in school, and we're not missing a lot of kids because of religious holidays. We also talked about the board policy versus administrative role, and just being more, or making sure we're mindful of our needs as a board regarding policy, and making sure we're referring people or decisions to administrators when appropriate. So that was a very good discussion that we had with Dr. Kilmer and Heidi. The DEI Board Committee is going to be meeting soon this month, and the District DEI Committee has been started, and that will be meeting shortly thereafter. We also talked at the retreat about recognitions. We as a board have recognized people who've won at like state levels or some national awards, but we want to make sure we're recognizing achievements of all types in our community. So as a board, we're looking to recognize more of our staff and students who've done great things that may not have gotten an award necessarily. So that could be anything from, a student who started a can drive, or showed some exceptional kindness, or something that's going on very well in a teacher's classroom. So we'll be working with the administration to get more information about people and events of that sort that we can recognize, and that we can also push out through our social media so the community is aware of all those great things that are happening in our district. So we recently had I think it was last week, the Micron Town Hall over at Wellwood. And I did want to mention that that's something we're discussing over at OC and BOCES quite a bit too, and the need to have school districts at the table as these discussions are happening. What we're hearing is that there's, as Dr. Tice has told us, focusing on primarily a few districts right now, but OC and BOCES is really pushing to have more school districts represented and have them come out and visit and learn about more school districts and partner with more school districts. And that was it for my report. Dr. Tice, your superintendent's report.
Certainly, in your board packet is the accompanying backup information. Under the superintendent's report tonight, under capital project update, as you're aware, we received final approval from State Ed Facilities Planning for the upcoming high school capital improvement project. As such, we are getting ready to go out to bid during March with the intent to award the bids in mid-April. Accordingly, construction would begin in the late spring, early summer months and will continue for more than 3 years. Hate speech workshop at Eagle Hill. Since our last meeting in January, building principal Maureen McChrystal and her team at Eagle Hill organized and delivered a student workshop in response to the recent hate speech that was discovered within the school. It is our intent to be able to replicate the workshop in other schools on campus in the months ahead. I had a chance to attend and it was very well done. UPK update. UPK registration is underway for the upcoming school year. Signs have been conspicuously posted throughout the community in an effort to remind our families about the registration period, which ends on March 31st. DEI committee update. Invitations for the 40-member DEI committee have been mailed to the participants who were selected from the 130 individuals who volunteered this autumn. Representatives were chosen to represent the 8 stakeholder groups identified in the DEI policy and regulation that govern this committee, including students, parents and guardians, administration, faculty, sports services staff, non-instructional staff, Board of Education members, and community members. The first meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, March 8th at Eagle Hill Middle School. And last but not least, Hall of Distinction update. As a reminder to everyone out there, the FM Hall of Distinction nominations are due by the close of business on Monday, February 27th. A committee comprised of faculty, administration, and Board of Education will meet in March to review the nominations in anticipation of making the awards in time for a May induction ceremony. That ends my superintendent's report.
Questions for Dr. Tice's first report?
Dr. Tice, for the DEI committee, and maybe this is for you too, Marissa, the overall charter of the committee, is that being dictated by the district, or is that our board ad hoc DEI committee? Or I'm just wondering, when we go to this first meeting, is there going to be a kind of charter and roles and responsibilities so that the people who are volunteering their time know sort of what they're there overall to do?
I think the answer, and I don't want to step in on Marissa, I think it's a little of both. I think the ad hoc committee, as we had talked, will provide some direction, kind of the bumpers for bumper bowling and keep them in their lane. But as the CRC Community Relations Committee talked, we didn't want to pre-package it, sell a bill of goods, so I think there will be team building exercises to start with our 2 outside facilitators. I know you all know, but the community needs to know, we have 2 outside facilitators who are collegiate professors but also reside within our community as community members and parents as well. So I think there will be some team building time and then letting them find their own way, much like the Safety and Security Committee that I know some of you participated on, where they, again, were allowed to chart their own direction, but came up with the 4 essential pillars in the safety and security arena. So I think it's a little of both, what CRC envisioned, but also the ad hoc committee trying to keep them in their lane, because I think one thing in talking to the facilitators, we want success to breed success, and we're certainly not going to solve all the world's ills in the first hour and a half, 2-hour meeting.
Yeah, I guess so, but ultimately they're an advisory committee, right? So they're advising the board, or they're advising the district, or?
The policy says to advise the administration, which I would bring it to the board.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure how I want to ask this, Dr. Tice, but did Ms. McChrystal develop any way to determine the efficaciousness of the hate speech workshops?
I can ask her. I know it was multifaceted, from a large group presentation in this very room to, again, team building exercises, talking through the importance of speech, that words matter, and then finally actually delving down into the specific verbiage that was used in the building. So I can ask her if they did an assessment afterwards. Keep in mind it was a half day in conjunction with the wellness day that occurred throughout campus.
Craig, in relation to the Mike Braun visit over at Wellwood the other night, I was able to stay for part of the meeting, not all of it. I did hear the part where ESM has been able to arrange a chip camp with Micron, and I think Liverpool and CNS as well. Is that something we're gonna have the opportunity to participate in this summer, or are we probably gonna have to wait a cycle?
We're probably going to have to wait a cycle. ESM, I believe, is doing it at OCC, Dr. Desiato said, and then Micron actually reached out to both Liverpool and North Syracuse, where they envision most of the activity to start. But we have them coming to the Chief School Officers meeting at BOCES in March. So I'm assuming that we'll get on the docket along with all of the other component districts.
Okay, Dr. Tice, your second report.
Now I feel like Mr. Corbin here, one right after another. The mental health report. The backup information is located in board docs. Item 1, PS I Love You Day. I would like to thank Mr. Will DeSantis and Heidi Green for organizing this past Friday's PS I Love You Day. On the second Friday of February, Mr. DeSantis and Ms. Green encouraged everyone in the community to wear purple in order to foster kindness and a welcoming environment, reduce bullying, and to educate others on mental health being just as important as physical health. As you can see, I forgot to wear purple on Friday, so I am wearing it today. Better late than never. Meeting with the county executive reached out to set up a meeting in early March to discuss the mental health support funding and the possibility, as you know from our letter, in setting up a drop-in mental health clinic that has been requested by our students. BIMAS 2 administration, I'd like to report that the BIMAS 2 mental health screener is in the process of being administered in the elementary schools last week and this week, and as well as at the middle schools in grades 5 and 6. The high school administrations will start at the end of March. Mental health task force update, we've already had a number of volunteers. As mentioned before, we're looking to move forward with a mental health task force made up of both internal and external community stakeholders to discuss our mental health initiatives going forward. This will include students as well. I will continue to report out as this task force gets underway in the months ahead. Mental health RFP update. I'd like to thank Dr. Melissa Carmen for sharing a survey with our staff members regarding their mental health needs. As you know, Dr. Carmen and members of her team are looking forward to beginning the many different initiatives under the RFP, such as this questionnaire that were outlined in her recent proposal. And then finally, a meeting with the High School Safe Club. That's hot off the press. I'm pleased to report that our district clerk, Sarah Gridley, and yours truly met with members of the high school team today, along with the officers from the Safe Club, to discuss modifications to our K-12 Insight Let's Talk communications portal. Ms. Gridley was able to reach out and to work with the folks at K-12 Insight to allow for non-emergency and anonymous reporting of mental health concerns within the school district. She's been working with our account manager, and so we took some suggestions today. I know we'll reach out and try to make that a reality in terms of having one-stop shopping. And the students said if we could do QR codes right today and post it to the link in the Schoology mental health folder, so it truly will be one-stop shopping in terms of being able to access and provide contact information. That ends my mental health report.
Questions for Dr. Tyson, the mental health report? Cindy?
This might relate to the meeting with, or the questionnaire done by Dr. Carmen, but I'm just wondering what it is that we can do as a board and as a district and as a community to find out what our staff needs from us. We've asked them to do really heavy lifting for a long time. And I get that part of this is the mental health needs, but what do they need from us? Do they need release time for more training? Do they need breathers? What is it that they specifically need? Because I don't know the answer from them. I think we can make assumptions. I think we can have committees. I think we can have initiatives. But I'd like to know what they need, because the past 3 years have been, as we all know, horrific for everyone. But I think we've asked and asked and asked to do more and do more and do more. And what do they need? And I guess I would like to find that out, not just as a mental health, but just as a day-to-day occurrence.
The survey is step one. It certainly is not the last piece, and it is something that the faculty and staff had asked for all along. They said, you know, we seem preoccupied with the students, and that's the business we're in, but at the same time, we can't forget about them. And certainly, I worry as we've gone through some of the recent tragedies in the district. I mean, I worry our crisis team will need a crisis team eventually. I just think we are asking a lot of them, and that's why I said tonight I applaud Dr. Carmen's ability to reach out kind of as a neutral third party and help direct us through this as well.
Craig, I'm wondering, and you might not know the answer to this yet, but the anonymous reporting about the mental health concerns, what's the, like, how is the district planning to respond to that? Because in my head, I'm thinking like all the things that could potentially be reported there anonymously, you know, how are we going to follow up on that? And I know that's what the students were asking for, but I think practically it presents some challenges.
We are putting a disclaimer there in terms of that the site isn't monitored, you know, 24/7, 365, that if they need to call in on an emergency to call these numbers. Right now, we're already seeing some of it appear on the anonymous tips, and so what the students were asking for was just to be able to grease the skids to let people know that whether it's this venue, and Mr. DeSantis actually helped frame the conversation on the things that would be pertinent in terms of the family school liaisons or himself or the counselors. So the idea is to use the student's term, the one-stop shopping, to be able to get that there. So for a student who didn't feel that I can't report it on anonymous tips, this gives them another toggle right on the Let's Talk platform. And they had talked about the QR codes with posters throughout the building to make it easy to access at the drop of a hat.
So are you anticipating questions like, I'm struggling, I need help, and then the response would be, these are the places to help? Or I guess, yeah, I'm always concerned there's going to be a kid who says I'm struggling, but then there's no way to identify who the child is.
We've asked whether it's self-reporting to what things were optional information pieces as opposed to just looking for a needle in a haystack. So the idea is if we have that information, that it's important for us to be able to follow up specifically with a student named. And it could be, I heard about it. We also put in the different areas in terms of the mental health needs at that time. So the students did a great job. They really thought it through. It's not a perfect be-all and end-all, but I think it just provides that extra layer, which they've been clamoring for. If they hear something or see something, they want to be able to say something and tell a trusted adult. So they even asked how it gets disseminated, whether it's to me, to the building principals, to the counselors.
Yeah, so is it like, you know, this is a quick and easy way for them to contact the counseling center, basically? Is that what as opposed to sending it into an email list where it gets lost in the emails? Or
correct,
something?
rather than carrying out their business on social media, it gives them a chance to tell a trusted adult anonymously at the district.
Okay.
Anonymous from the reporter's perspective, not necessarily the student in crisis.
Okay. And my other question was, I know we talked in the past and recent about reinstituting a survey, a student survey. Do we have an update on that?
That we're hoping to do with the mental health task force. We've been preoccupied, as you know, with the DEI task force. Next up is the mental health task force, which we want to be crafted to target student needs. And that being said, we talked as a district office team that has to continue into academics as well. It can't just be reactionary. It has to be proactive too, and we've talked about things like homework. So, you know, in terms of academics, what that looks like. So I see that being a little of both, not just being reactionary, but also being proactive.
All right, item 2.07, committee and representative updates. Just mindful of the time, we're running a bit behind. Public comment is next, so if we do not need to give a report from a committee. Or if we do, let's keep it as brief as possible. Let's see.
I'll be brief.
Go ahead, Daryl.
The audit committee met in January. Mr. Buffum was not well, so Cheryl Conley, our treasurer, gave us the report that there were no findings or concerns on the internal audit, which is good news as always. And the staff, business office staff, and Jim will determine what the audit area will be for the coming year. And we'll discuss it at our next meeting. And it's now 6 months that our new claims auditor has been in our employ, and so she will be coming to our meeting in March, and then she will come to meet with the whole board. And you've probably noticed that her reports are a little different, and I think a little bit more comprehensive. So if you want to think about that, and if you have questions for her in March. Thanks.
Thank you, Daryl. Community relations, Sarah?
Yeah, we had a nice discussion we invited the HSA presidents to come and join us this past week. And they're really excited about forming more of a partnership with the board and the district, and maybe supplementing some of the priorities that the district has in other ways. So maybe they could bring in guest speakers or have book reads or some things to engage the community in different ways than we have in the past through the HSAs. So we're going to be working with them again in April. Keep you posted on that.
Thank you. Facilities, Dan?
At our last facilities meeting, so see if anybody's, it was probably the best one, yes, Daryl.
We have another meeting coming up after the midwinter recess, and certainly the excitement of the approval of the high school project is first and foremost, but at the next board meeting, we'll be bringing the RFP results for the safety and security audit. I had a chance to talk to Dan as chair offline, and I know that was something the rest of the committee asked me to do, so I do think we're going to be ready to move forward with that.
For policy, in addition to the policies that are listed on the minutes, we have discussed, and I probably will need Sarah Gridley's help with this, that we will, with our turnover to the NISBA policies, we will do them in big chunks of all the 1,000s or all the 7,000s together, but they won't go active live on board docs until we've done all of the policies as a district. So what we're approving, I think there's an asterisk on it that says we're approving the policies, but they will not be all listed on board docs until it's a complete set. So when people come in, they can see them, but they're not. Is that right, Sarah, that you can see them on board docs, but they're not active? You can't see them. Okay. So we'll be looking at the old policies until we have the complete set, because we don't want to have things that overlap or conflict with each other.
I mean, from a practical standpoint, so like tonight, the 6,000 series is in second reading. Are you saying that we're adopting them, but we're not really adopting them? I mean, what is?
You're accepting them, but not enacting them. So rather than wait until we have a huge, pile of policies, which would be, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds, we're approving them in chunks, but as some of these policies are intertwined and they relate to each other, we don't want to, approve them in sections. So we're basically approving it pending the adoption of the entire new revised policies.
Which is consistent with what the board did when they transitioned to Erie 1.
That was July 1st, 2017.
That is correct.
Okay.
So can we just clarify then, if I'm a public community member and I wanted to see the actual policy of something that we have approved, how would I go about making sure I have the latest, greatest approved version?
The policies that are currently in board docs are more or less the Erie 1 policy book. Those will remain in effect until the board acts in the future to activate the NYSBA policies that were previously approved.
Now,
Or
if I
held.
remember, we decided that in the agendas of each meeting, the policies are available to the public as we approve them in second reading. So somebody could go back and see, if they wanted to, see what we approved, but it's just not enacted yet.
Correct.
So Sarah, as board members, if I'm trying to find the policy that's in effect tomorrow, even though we're approving the 6,000s tonight, whatever is in board docs is what is in effect as of the point in time, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
The board docs policy book is
What's in
the
effect?
policy in force. That's
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
All right, I'm going to just move on to, are there any more policy questions? All right, moving on to legislative liaison. At retreat, we talked about contacting NYSBA to see if they have any information about other districts who have made decisions about holidays, about religious holidays. And I reached out to Sandra Rufo, who then put me in touch with Paul Heiser, who is a data person for NYSBA. And he is going to reach out to other board presidents and other boards to see if anybody has experience. But he said he had not talked to any districts who have gone through this looking from the data perspective. But he's going to reach out and see if he can find anyone for us.
Okay, thank you. Now we're moving on to public comment. We do have several members of the community here for public comment. Prior to beginning public comment, I just want to remind members of the public who wish to speak, there's 3 minutes for you to speak during public comment. Please avoid mentioning the names of any students or staff members directly or by their titles, even your own student. If you have particular issues with individual staff members, there's a chain of command that is listed on the website where you can bring concerns to those individuals and following up the chain of command to their supervisors. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. And we have a number of people who've signed up, so let me get to that email. Okay, we will start with Mr. Josh Weaver.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time and attention to the matter of veterans' tax exemption. I want to bring up something abstract, but I promise I'll bring it home. Is anyone a news junkie? Then you'll know of the earthquakes in Syria and Buffalo. Syria being a war-torn country, people there didn't know it was an earthquake, but thought it was par for the course, more war. Instead of going outside, they went into their basements. Buildings collapsed on them. They don't have peace and security. Peace and security. Peace and security. Like we have. Their death toll is currently 35,000. Contrast that with the urban paradise we have here in FM School District. We don't know how good we have it. But we have this abstract thought that we owe our peace and security to veterans. Well, we're not simply abstract. We served. We provided peace and security for our slice of heaven. In fact, we still serve. Many of us still lace up our boots. We lead your local parades and bury our comrades. After a parade on Memorial Day, someone asked, "Josh, I don't get it. Hot dogs and balloons?" I said, yes. Ain't it great? As I've said here before, this exemption is not just for those who have served, but also to inspire more to serve. Sadly, the world is not settled and war will happen again. As a combat veteran inspired by the events of 9/11, I'm a part of a very supportive community, not just because these guys are cool. They are. but because we must support each other. We travel far and wide to the pits of hell, so you don't even know what we have done on your behalf. There are multiple schools in Onondaga County that have honored their veterans by enacting the veterans tax exemption. Why not us? Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie White? Mr. White not here? Okay. Sam Doubleday?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sam Doubleday from the Village of Fayetteville. I am here to just bring some knowledge to the board on my industry, because I believe ultimately it would have to come to the board to make a decision on this program that me and my firm represents, and possibly an RFP process. But what's available to the board, and I'm talking about the district's assets, is a free to participate in New York State, passed by legislation, clean energy program. It's called Community Distributed Generation, passed by the Public Service Commission in 2015. Informal name called Community Solar Utility Bill Crediting. The last three words are the most important words. We've all probably got mailers at our homes, at least I have, about 10 of them in the last couple of years, from a big company called Nextamp. Want you to join a community solar farm. That's what I'm talking about. I'd like the district to know about this. As I say, it's a free program. You'll probably have to vote on it somewhere down the line. It's a very finite program. The capacity is not infinite. You sign up, you get a discount on your national grid bill. Residentially, but I'm talking here for the district buildings. Cicero North Syracuse Junior High School, we estimate about $10,000 a year they're entitled to get once they sign. It's a simple contract, and the company, my company is one of the handful of companies that administer this. I'm a pioneer. My company's a pioneer. Came out as legislation in 2015, but we're what's called an independent power producer. The electricity from these community solar farms, like right up here next to the Church of Latter-day Saints, that's a community solar farm, goes up onto the grid, and the utility by law has to buy that from us for 25 years at a set rate. But it's got to be tracked and monetized. And that's why we have participants or subscribers volunteer. Their account numbers, like this account number here, virtually is attached to an amount of electricity. We get paid 90 cents on the dollar, and the participant gets 10 cents on the dollar. So that's the credit on your utility bill. Community solar, utility bill crediting. We're making electricity in New York State that supplants electricity that we would have to go out and import from outside our boundaries. So when you see these solar farms, most of them are that. So I'd be happy to come back again and give a presentation at a grander scale, but community solar utility bill crediting is a free program. I'd like the district to consider it. And as I say, it's very finite. It's not infinite. You snooze, you lose, first come, first serve. Around here, the Village of Fayetteville, Fayetteville Free Library, Freedom of Espresso Coffee, Dr. Clark Goodwin, Tops, Kinney Drugs, a lot of entities, all Walmarts in New York State are participating in this. So free program equates to money on your bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. But just the process, make sure you reach out to Mr. Corbin in the business office. Typically, these sorts of this type of information and business offering goes through the business office first before it comes to the board.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, oops, go back to email. And Alice Massa, did I mispronounce your last name, Alice? Sorry if I did.
Yeah, Alice Massa.
Massa, oh, got it, thank you.
So, town resident, parent, grandparent, working on the electric bus questions, and I know we will revisit this again, but pushing it down the road, it will end up costing taxpayers more money. To have a huge bill come all at once is not as wise as going ahead and phasing it in, transitioning into the electric buses, finding out what's needed, training drivers, dispatchers, finding out what's involved will make the process go much more smoothly and give the right example to the community, to the students. And I can read you letters from local doctors that talk about the health benefits to students and staff and people who operate the buses who have been affected by COVID, flu, asthma, and other respiratory issues that miss school, miss work because of issues related to fossil fuel, inhaled carcinogens and materials that come from fossil fuel buses. The question about the buses that are being purchased now based on the last approved budget, those buses will not be saleable in New York State. No fossil fuel buses can be sold in New York State, new or otherwise, after 2027. And all the buses have to be electric by 2035. So those buses that are being purchased, and if another 6 is purchased, no, they will not be resellable in the state. So one thing that wasn't mentioned was the thousands of dollars that are saved from on fossil fuels, on diesel fuels that will not be involved with electric buses. Repair costs, there's no exhaust systems to repair, there's no belts, there's no oil systems, filters, all that does not have to have the same maintenance level that you do with fossil fuel buses. So there's a big savings there. And other districts, and there are other districts that will share information in New York State, and they save tremendous amounts of money on each bus each year, and not even talking about the carbon emissions that are saved from happening in the faces of our students and people in the school district. The electric buses do travel around 120 miles round trip. Most of our routes are well under that, and the diesel buses, so if we transition, the electric buses can initially be used on the shorter routes and phase into the phase out the diesel buses gradually.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for those emails. Okay, moving on to new business, item 4.01, approval of the minutes from the January 9th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Thank you, Daryl. Second from Sarah. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? 2, 3 abstentions. Jason, Kelly, and Sherry. Item 4.02, approval of the minutes from the January 23rd special meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Cindy, and second from Sherry. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? We've got 2 abstentions. Dan and Sarah. Okay. Next, item 4.03, resolution for Eagle Hill Emergency Project. Revised. Is there a motion that it be resolved that the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District approves the resolution for the Eagle Hill Emergency Project as revised? Is there a motion? Jason, and a second from Kelly. Discussion?
Just have a question, maybe I can answer it. Are we just transferring those funds from account to account? Because we had specifically talked about this coming out of cafeteria funds. So. Yeah, the revised Eagle Hill resolution. We had originally talked about coming from cafeteria funds. That's what. Yeah.
Yeah, the hood itself is going to come. That's going to be. Sorry. So the hood itself, I think, was $193,000. That was something that ideally would go through. The plan was to kind of go through and use general fund from an aid perspective. Cafeteria funds would ideally be set aside to use it. On top of it, we're going to have equipment needs as well, and I think that was somewhere around the 200,000 mark or something to that extent, or 125. Is that what you're ultimately asking me, is where the funding's coming from?
Well, I'm just asking because a change was made in the resolution from what was previously approved.
So
as
the
capital
big thing,
funds, and now
Dan,
it's-
the short answer really was to get aid, was to run it through from general fund.
Thank you. All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye. And no one's opposed or abstaining. Next, item 4.04, NISBA policy transition. Is there a motion that it be resolved that the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District hereby approves the 6,000 series policies in second reading to be enacted upon completion of the NISBA policy transition and approval of the policy book? Is there a motion? Thank you, Sherry, and a second from Sarah. Discussion?
I had three just kind of hyper-technical things when I went back through this. On page 15 of this, which is policy 6410, where it talks about the password to the check signing equipment. Everything in that paragraph talks about the treasurer and deputy treasurer acting independently or jointly. But then the way that you all changed this, it was that the treasurer should retain the password and should not surrender or delegate that to any other individual. Well, if they can't delegate it, then I'm not sure how a deputy treasurer or whatever access or use the equipment.
Should we add the words deputy treasurer in there?
To any other individual other than the deputy treasurer?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So that was one. The second was on page 17. I'd just like to understand the change from board to school business official on initiating electronic transactions. I thought that that was something that we do at the annual meeting each July, and that was a board responsibility. So I'm not quite sure why that, I just would like to understand that change.
Yeah, was that something suggested by Mr. Corbin? Or was that something we came up with?
Just stay there, just stay there, Brad.
I'm going to get used to this. So the EFT aspect through electronic funds, I think it's ultimately, I need to do it, but ultimately you're going to end up approving it probably through the aspect from anything from the actual financial statements, monthly, the treasurer's reports, to anything from budget transfers to actually, approving the audits and things of that nature. So it might be a secondary aspect of it, but the actual EFT itself, it's usually probably me, and then ultimately you're reviewing that?
It's not the EFT, it's the who is authorized to make the electronic transactions. And I thought that was a board responsibility, and that's how the policy was originally proposed, and then committee changed board to school business official will specify who's authorized to initiate, approve, et cetera, electronic transactions. So I'm just,
I believe what you're referring to is the wire transfers up and budget transfers up to a certain threshold. Is it reorg?
I thought that that's what we approved in general, was who can actually make those. So I'm just confused as to why that change was made.
Further down, it says wire transfers to non-school district accounts may require Board of Education approval in accordance with the terms set forth the annual reorganization meetings. That's what you're referring to, right? That we approved those, the reorg meeting overall. And you thought it included that?
No, it was,
No?
I mean, that's just one aspect of it. I mean, that it may or may not, but I'm just, in general, who is authorized to go in and make an electronic transaction? I thought that was always a board authorization that we did at the annual meeting. Is there a reason why we're sub-delegating that?
I'm trying to remember the recommendation as to the reasoning for it, and I think it did have something to do with the amounts, but that's not spelled out in there. And I see they're conferring over there.
Mr. Cogan's recommendation.
Current policy states that procedures will be implemented specifying who is authorized to initiate. At least 2 individuals will be involved in each transaction. It does not specify the board.
But don't we make that at the annual meeting? Don't we make that authorization at the annual meeting each July?
All wire transfers will be authorized by the treasurer again every, or
So let me suggest this. This is being approved but not enacted. If we could just try to get an answer to that, we can come back to that since it's not being enacted. Then we don't have to hold this tonight. And then my last question was just on, don't go too far, Brett, don't lean back. My last question was on, I think it was page 22, annual inventory by policy was moved from annual to every 5 years. Was there a reason for that?
So inventory-wise, it was something like from an actual physical inventory, we didn't, at least my experience, we hadn't usually done it on an annual basis. It was something I usually, planned on doing on a periodic basis, but no less than 5 years from that aspect. And it's more of just the time, materiality, things of that nature. I know my past days as an auditor would be usually was a situation of what's your materiality threshold and, what are you hoping to capture? And I know in the beginning, districts didn't have as many higher price things, so they had, basically, they had more higher price things, but there were, more of them, so the audits used to take longer. So threshold seems to have dropped over the years, where I know at my previous district recently, we went from like a $500 cap up to, I think it was around 3,000. It's really to capture from a fixed asset perspective, what's that capitalization threshold and what things are on there. So it'd be like more of like your trucks and bigger pieces of equipment, the computers and, Chromebooks and things of that nature wasn't as much as because the cost, the fact that it's basically going to be something that are you going to just, basically incur the cost of it and then just basically turn around and purchase another one from an immateriality aspect. So that was really what I was trying to do from that aspect, was just to minimize the impact of it from it. If we want to visit it from an audit committee and you want to continue in every year aspect, we can certainly do that. It just hadn't been my experience.
Primarily, I wasn't sure what the actual current process is.
Yeah.
Is it an annual, or is it every 3 years, every 5 years?
I think with the annual on there, I didn't really want to limit us to annual is really what I was hoping to do. So my hope was between looking at it from, we got an internal audit, we have an external audit, we have potential for state comptroller audit, we have our internal thresholds of whatever we're looking at. You're going to have a board review. I didn't really know how much exposure, and at the same time, if we could use the time, that's really what I was chasing, to be honest. Okay. Yep.
So we just have to make sure that, Sarah and Brad, you'll look into why it says board and not, sorry, it doesn't say board anymore, it says business official. Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to 4.05, NISBA Policy Transition 1000 Series, Policies in First Reading. Is there a motion that be resolved, the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District hereby moves the 1000 Series policies into second reading? Is there a motion? Thank you, Kelly, and a second from Cindy. Discussion?
I just want to, I think based on our new idea of our superintendent evaluation being being a calendar year, not a school year, we're going to have to do some editing right away to this. But this is how, a month ago, this is how it looked.
I did have just a couple of quick things. In the reg for 1420, I just noticed a discrepancy between the, who participates in the Instructional Material Review Committee. It says in the policy in 1420 that there are 2 teachers, and just the reg just refers to 1 teacher, so I just happened to catch that discrepancy. I think it's in... Oh, okay, so I'm way ahead of myself. Okay, never mind. I read them all, though.
Anything else? Okay, we have a first and a second. All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye, and no one's opposed or abstaining. Okay, moving on to item 4.07, appointments. Is there a motion that it be resolved that the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius School District make the following appointments as presented? Daryl and Sherry, oops, what, sorry? 4.06. Oh, sorry, go back. 4.06. Is there a motion that it be resolved that the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District hereby moves the 7,000 series policies into second reading? Is there a motion? Thank you, Sarah and Kelly. Discussion, the 7,000 series? All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? Okay. Now we'll move on to 4.07, appointments. Is there a motion that it be resolved that the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius School District makes the following appointments as presented? The asbestos designee, moving from Russ to our new facilities director, Jeffrey Brown, and rules and regulations for extra classroom funds, moving Stephanie Rice and adding Mary Ann Murphy. Is there a motion? Thank you, Daryl. Second from Jason. Any discussion? All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye. No one's opposed or abstaining. Item 4.08, approval of goals. Is there a motion that it be resolved the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District approves the goals for the 2023 year as presented? Is there a motion? Thank you, Rebecca, and a second from Sarah. And I do want to thank Sarah for this very nice, concise format of a lot of red lines and other things. So thank you for that, Sarah. Discussion?
So I would just say, I mean, just since I put it down, the timelines, is everybody, I mean, I just sort of put something for discussion down, but I wanted to see what other people thought about that, because we never talked about that before.
When you just put these down, I know you left it open for discussion, but is that when you think that the final report will be presented? Like that's when, okay. Okay.
Craig, what do you feel about it? Since you're the one who has to do it.
I got yelled at earlier today for using the term learning loss, Dr. Coughlin, right? So we're not supposed to use that. What's that? I mean, I'm teasing, but I just think...
What's the term that is what is more commonly used?
Dr. Coughlin sent us out a nice article. What was the term that was used? But, yeah. No, I've got an idea. Impact tutoring, as we talked about today. It's a carve-out of the state, the governor's budget. How much, Mr. Corbin? 400? So they're calling it impact tutoring, and it's a carve-out of the foundation aid. So we are going to have to put a plan together, and June would be great.
So could we just say academic areas in need of additional support?
That'd be fine.
Additional questions, thoughts? I really like that with the timeline. I think it's a good timeline.
But, I mean, clear from the governor, and certainly the commissioner has been in discussions with her. They're referring to it as the impact tutoring.
Just a new catchphrase. A new catchphrase. Okay. All right. All those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye. And no one's opposed or abstaining. Did you say money? You got to use the right word to get the money. No, see, it's 8:45. It's that time. It's that time. No, that's, you're right. You're right. Okay, now I'm going to get us moving here. Board development. So we already talked about the ad hoc DEI committee, and the next one up is going to be the mental health committee, so we'll get moving on that. Okay. Then working agenda items, we're going to make sure we put the veterans tax exemption underneath there. All of the tax exemptions, that's right. Excuse me. So we'll add those. Potential considerations for future meetings. We should add something probably about electric buses and all those things that we're going to have to consider for that.
I wanted to add one item to
Sure.
that, possibly, or at least talk to Dr. Tice about it, but we decided we don't really have a restorative justice goal right now, but it is something that we've had on our, on our radar, and I'm just curious if there could be a presentation at some point by an expert in the field. I was approached by somebody in the community that does that work and consults with school districts around the state. I'm happy to share that information, Dr. Tice, but just, are other people interested in looking at that issue? It's not an issue we would tackle, but just to get more information on kind of what districts are doing to transform some of their policies and codes of conduct.
Yeah. Kelly's been talking about it since she was first elected, and I'm behind her 100%. I'd love to see us do something in that.
Is there any work currently being done in the buildings? Are administrators looking at this right now? I don't want to overlap or, do something.
Yeah, I'll
already
take it
doing.
back to the administrative team, and we can work on a presentation.
We add at some point in this, discussing homework policies? I know work was being done on that, but at some point, are we going to pin a discussion on this?
It's in the building action plan for the high school at that level, so I know they're having a conversation about it for this year. That was what was presented back in October.
No, I know that it was being looked at was part of the plan. Are we ever going to circle back on, and this is considerations for future meetings, that's what we're talking about. Are we ever going to circle back on that as a board level discussion, or?
So you said it's in the high school's action plan, so that means the
They're having conversations
administrative
about it.
team at the high school is working with the teachers to develop more information or to come to some conclusions?
That is my understanding, yes.
So I guess the next step, since they are working on it, would be, is there a timeline then for them that they believe they would have like some resolution or some recommendation based on that discussion? Because if they're doing the work, to Dan's point, is there going to be a presentation from that work, and if so, when?
Well, the idea of going to the calendar year goals was to be able to establish the goals now, so as the buildings looked in the rearview mirror this spring and set their building action plans for this coming October. So hopefully we'll be able to report out this autumn, is my guess.
Okay, can you clarify that, just to
Certainly,
make sure
yep.
with the administrative team that that's, I don't need a specific date, but that's the rough
Right.
time frame they're looking at?
Yep.
That'll be helpful. Dan, that,
I was also just curious if,
we just wanted to make sure that's what you were,
I mean, I'd love to hear some progress or plan on that before autumn, when we're in the next school year. I mean, that was something that was being addressed this academic year. So as a priority as we were told.
But
So-
again, they're looking through it this year. That's why I said my first response was to check to where their status is. I mean, if they're done sooner, we don't have to wait, but I don't know until they review, until they look in the rearview mirror.
And to the point that Cindy was making earlier, they have a lot on their plate. They're taxed quite extraordinarily, so I don't want to push this work any, to the extreme because of all the other things they have going on. So I think we should kind of work with their time frame on this, considering everything. I know, Dan.
Let's hope we can appreciate the irony of it. They're taxed, so give them more time. We're talking about homework on students who are taxed and need more time. I mean, let's just appreciate the irony of that. And at some point, we do need to bring this to a discussion and a process.
We also have to be careful not to overstep our role. That's fine.
But it would be great from a planning perspective if we heard something early summertime, because that way teachers have time to plan, right, for the fall. So if we hear, to Dan's point, if they don't report out till autumn, it's gonna be another full school year cycle before anything definitively comes from the board in that, in terms of if we set a policy or do something. So it would be really helpful from a board perspective to get it under consideration in the June, July timeframe, so that way we can make progress on it before the academic school year starts.
And I just want, because this was a very good discussion at the retreat, making sure that we're mindful of the work that they're doing. So I think the first step is let's check in and see where they are in context of everything else they're working on. I mean, obviously the urgency that, that some feel towards getting this done is out there, but I don't want to ignore the fact that they have been working on this and they may have a timetable already set up. I get that we'd like to have it in place before the fall, but I'd like to hear back, not right now, I don't want you texting anybody, from the high school administrative team as to where they are and what that looks like. And if they can get here before the fall, that would be great, but if there is a reason why they need more time on it, then I think we should be respectful of that. But I get it, we would like to have it before the fall, if possible.
Understood.
Okay. Dates to remember. Let's see. Oh, got the High School Musical coming up. What's the High School Musical this year? Oh, Little Mermaid, okay. All right, lots of concerts, dance marathon. Okay.
And I just want to say the Wellwood play is also coming up.
The Wellwood play, is that on there?
I think is on here. They're
Band
doing Dear
concert.
Edwina, which I had never heard of before.
It's what?
Dear Edwina.
I never heard that one. That sounds interesting.
You gotta come see it.
Sounds very appropriate for middle schoolers.
Yeah, I don't see that one or the, on there. We should make sure we add that one. Thank you for mentioning that. Dear Edwina. That's cool. Got us all wanting to go now, see what that's about. All right, moving on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thank you, Daryl. And a second from Kelly. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye, and no one's opposed or abstaining. All right, next we're going to move into a motion for executive session for the purpose of discussing the employment history of a particular individual, matters leading to the appointment or employment of a particular individual, and an exempt session with counsel, with legal counsel. Okay, all those is there a motion? I'm sorry. Thank you, Rebecca. A second from Jason. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Everyone's in favor. No one's opposed. So we'll move into executive session, exempt session, and then adjourn directly from that with no further public business. Thank you.